Hey there, and welcome back. Tonight we're stepping into the echoing halls of medieval Rome, where incense curls in the air, bells toll across rooftops, and the man in white carries more than just a crown. The papacy may seem like the pinnacle of divine purpose, but behind the marble and gold lies a world of whispered bargains, political storms, and unbearable pressure. To wear the triple tiara was not just to lead, it was to be watched, weighed, and often quietly broken. This story isn't about sainthood, it's about survival. And the beauty of cathedrals can't hide the burden of power that rested on one fragile human soul. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if these quiet journeys through history truly resonate with you. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from tonight and what time is it there? I love seeing the quiet constellation we form across the world. Now, settle in, light a candle if you'd like. Let's walk the stone corridors of power together. Tonight we step not into a palace of glory, but into a chamber of burden veiled in velvet. The coronation is complete. The bells have rung, the incense has curled into heaven, but the moment the doors close behind the cheering crowd, the silence rushes in like a tide. You are no longer the man you were yesterday. Now you wear the white cassock that clings to your shoulders like a binding oath. The triple tiara rests not just on your brow, but on your spine, your lungs, your every breath. It gleams in the light of the Lateran chandeliers, but it weighs like a crown of iron. The keys of St. Peter have been pressed into your trembling hands, and as the rituals end, the questions begin. The cardinals have vanished into their silk-draped chambers, and the choir's final amen still echoes down the marble halls. Alone now, you cross the darkened threshold into your private chamber. The walls are lined with holy relics and faded frescoes, but they offer no comfort. This room has held popes who ruled with conviction, and popes who died with regret. You do not yet know which you will be. The air is thick with wax smoke and dust from ancient scrolls. You kneel by the gilded bedpost, not to rest, but to pray. You ask for guidance, not glory, for clarity, not triumph, and still you feel nothing but a cold trickle of doubt at the base of your neck. Moments ago, thousands of pilgrims knelt in the square and hailed you as Vicar of Christ. Now you listen to the scratch of mice in the walls and wonder how many of them are spies in red robes. Your predecessor's portrait hangs above your writing desk. His painted eyes follow you, serene and unreadable. He died in this very room, they say, of a fever, or perhaps a poisoned chalice. You will never know the full truth. You reach for the first of many letters delivered to your new desk. A scroll from a king in the north, demanding papal endorsement of his war. Another from a distant bishop, accusing a rival of heresy. There is no welcome letter, no congratulations. Just crisis wrapped in parchment and sealed with wax. You are expected to answer with divine certainty, as if the Almighty Himself whispered into your ear. But God is quiet tonight, and the silence grows louder. Outside the window, Rome sleeps. Torches flicker in the courtyards. The city has crowned a new shepherd, but you are not a shepherd. You are a man in borrowed robes, weighed down by legacy, hunted by ambition, and utterly alone. You understand now that the papacy is not a throne. It is a reckoning, and it has already begun. The white robes you now wear feel impossibly heavy, as though stitched not with thread, but with the debts of generations. They shimmer in candlelight, clean and holy to the eye, yet you know the fabric is soaked with promises made in the shadows of the conclave. There is a certain smell that clings to papal garments, incense, old stone, and something else. Sweat. The kind that comes not from fear, but from calculation. In the days before the final ballot, you met with cardinals behind velvet curtains, offering quiet reassurances, nods of agreement, and the subtle hint of reward. You never spoke the bribes aloud, but they were heard. And now, those debts knock at your chamber doors before the ink on your new seal has dried. A cardinal from Naples requests a cousin be made bishop. Another from Avignon demands a seat on a lucrative council. Each of them was part of the chorus that sang your name in the Sistine Chapel, and now they return for their share of the hymn. You sit behind the curved desk, listening to their rehearsed petitions, and you try to smile with grace, but your stomach clenches. Every "Yes, Your Eminence" is another stone added to the foundation of a house that may one day crush you. You learn quickly that the papacy is not one with prayers, it is one with favors, and those favors rot like fruit left too long in the sun. Outside, the courtyards are swept clean and white for the public. Inside, the carpets are thick with secrets and silk-booted footsteps. You attend your first formal banquet as Pope, hosted beneath the golden ceiling of the Vatican's reception hall. Candles hang from chandeliers like captive stars, and silver dishes gleam beneath towers of fruit and roast duck. You raise a goblet and offer a blessing to your guests, but your eyes dart from one crimson hat to another, watching which cardinals whisper to which, who eats with whose left hand, who drinks but does not swallow. You've begun to speak the language of power now, and it is silent, gestural, and merciless. Later that night, after the final wine has been poured and the guests have gone, you return to your chamber. The fire has gone cold, and the draft under the door brings the night air in like a reminder. You remove the white stole from your shoulders and run your hand along its embroidery. You wonder how many hands stitched this cloth, how many monks bent over thread while fasting, never knowing they were weaving a net. You lie down, not to rest, but to think. The votes that elevated you were never free. Every robe worn in this palace was tailored with obligation. And now, with dawn on the horizon, you understand that you are not draped in holiness. You are bound in promises you no longer control. The corridors of the Lateran Palace stretch before you like the veins of some ancient creature, winding and pulsing with whispers from centuries past. As you walk them alone in the early dawn, your footsteps fall in rhythm with history's heartbeat. Every statue watches. Every tapestry listens. You pass a bronze bust of Pope Gregory and feel his stony eyes judge your posture, your breath, your silence. These halls do not simply contain the church. They contain its ghosts. You can feel them behind every wooden door. Popes who ruled with iron, or with grace, or with fear. Some died of fever, some by poison. Others simply vanished into rumor. You press your palm against the cool wall, and for a moment, it feels like the skin of the past itself. You've inherited not just a throne, but an invisible empire of shadows and secrets, and none of them are easily exorcised. In the audience chamber, the marble floor has been worn smooth by centuries of robes. This is where decrees were shouted, alliances made, and excommunications thundered across continents. Your voice will soon join theirs, though your hands still tremble at the thought. The first official letters await your signature. A bishop in Bohemia needs guidance on a regional heresy. A Sicilian monastery claims to have found the bones of a forgotten saint. A German prince requests your blessing to marry his cousin in defiance of canon law. The questions are varied, the stakes monumental. You dip your quill into ink that has barely dried from your predecessor's reign, and you pause. Every answer you give becomes precedent. Every silence becomes permission. Even now, you hear faint murmurs from the antechamber. Your secretary is already debating how your decisions will shape the tone of your pontificate. And you haven't even spoken yet. Later, you make your way to the papal library, where the dust of centuries lies heavy over forgotten wisdom. Scrolls, manuscripts, letters written by trembling hands during wars, famines, plagues. You see one penned during the sack of Rome, the ink blotched by what might be blood. Another, a letter from a dying pope asking forgiveness for sins only he knew. You open a leather-bound volume of papal bulls and pause at the ones bearing your family name. The decisions they made echo still, some revered, others cursed. You wonder what your page will look like when all is done. How many lives will it ruin? How many will it save? As evening falls, you walk through the basilica alone, your footsteps swallowed by the vastness. You look up at the painted ceiling and imagine all the men who looked up in prayer and found only doubt. You kneel at the altar, but your thoughts drift again to the dead. They do not speak, but they surround you. The papacy is not a living office. It is a burial mound stacked high with choices made under duress. You close your eyes, and for the first time you understand this truth. You are not just the Pope. You are a caretaker of ghosts, and they are watching everything you do. The morning brings no peace. Even the sunlight that streams through the stained glass seems sharpened, cutting across the floor in crimson and gold. You rise before the bells, already dressed in white, your back aching from a night of shallow sleep. Today, the kings will arrive, not in person, but through envoys bearing titles as heavy as their scrolls. One from the German lands brings news of border skirmishes and demands a papal mediator. Another from England insists his monarch's war is just and begs for your blessing upon his banner. A third from France arrives not with requests, but veiled threats, implying that your neutrality may come at the cost of loyalty. Each of them kneels before you with folded hands, but their eyes are sharp. These are not men of faith. They are lions wrapped in velvet, and their teeth are just beneath the surface. You receive them in the audience chamber, seated beneath a tapestry of Peter receiving the keys. You wonder if he ever regretted it. The envoys speak in florid Latin, quoting scripture when it suits them and twisting doctrine like a blade. You nod. You listen. You sip wine from a golden chalice, but behind your calm face, your thoughts churn. If you bless the German campaign, the French will retaliate. If you approve the English marriage, the Spanish alliance may crumble. You are meant to be the moral compass of Christendom, but your compass spins endlessly, pulled by politics, not principle. Each decision you make earns applause in one kingdom and condemnation in another. There is no right answer, only choices that delay disaster. Later, you walk the gardens with your secretary, discussing the implications of your audience. The roses are in bloom, and bees hover lazily among the petals. You are reminded that nature does not care who wears the tiara. The world turns, kingdoms rise and fall, and the church is expected to endure it all. Your secretary speaks of diplomacy, of careful phrasing, and plausible deniability. You admire his cleverness, but it leaves a bitter taste. You were chosen to be a shepherd, not a chess master. Yet here you are, surrounded by pawns, knights, and queens who move faster than you can follow. By afternoon, word reaches you that a minor noble in Tuscany has declared a heretical vision and is amassing followers. The local bishop pleads for action, but you hesitate. If you condemn too swiftly, you risk martyring a madman. If you wait too long, rebellion will fester. The Holy Office demands clarity, and yet your vision is clouded by smoke from too many fires. You sign a letter authorizing investigation, but refrain from excommunication, for now. As the sun sets behind the dome of St. John Lateran, you retire to your private chapel. You kneel in silence, asking for wisdom. None comes. Only the slow, steady echo of your own breath and the creak of ancient timbers above. You realize that the voice of God has been replaced by the voices of kings, and those voices do not whisper, they roar. The papal ring gleams on your hand, warm from the heat of your skin, and the weight of what it signifies. It is a seal, a promise, a prison. This morning you are handed the first set of official letters to sign, each bearing your new title in elegant script. The wax has not yet cooled on your authority, and already the quill trembles between your fingers. You dip it in ink, dark as spilled blood, and begin the daily ritual of judgment. The first scroll comes from a far-off abbey seeking permission to rebuild after fire. The second, from a royal widow, pleads for absolution for her husband who hanged peasants without trial. The third requests a decree granting indulgence to a noble who wishes to finance a crusade not with his sword, but with gold. Each letter is a doorway, and every doorway leads to a room where someone will live or suffer because of what you write today. You sign your name with the stylized flourish now required of you, watching it curl across the parchment like a brand. The letters are taken from your hand by a scribe and sealed with the ring of the fisherman. You hear the soft crack of wax hardening as the seal is pressed, and each time it strikes, you feel something inside you tighten. This ring does not just close envelopes, it closes possibilities. You once thought the Pope had the freedom to shape the church. Now you learn the truth. The office shapes you, carves you, demands from you a kind of obedience few understand. The ledger that sits beside the stack of letters is even more daunting. It contains lists of incomes and expenses, donations and debts, rents from papal lands, and promises yet fulfilled. Every name in that book is tied to an expectation. An abbey expecting grain, a monastery expecting repairs, a cardinal expecting his nephew's elevation. You are not just the shepherd of souls, you are the keeper of accounts. The master of finances enters, bowing low, and presents another leather-bound volume. He speaks in hushed tones of overdue tithes, unpaid indulgence fees, and the rising costs of maintaining both the Roman Curia and the Papal Guard. He suggests raising the rate on penances, perhaps adding fees for marriage dispensations, or charging for the viewing of sacred relics. You nod, but the bile rises in your throat. You are a holy man by title, but a banker by necessity. Your predecessor approved a crusade in the East and drained the treasury doing so. Now you inherit both the glory and the ruin. You cannot simply trust in faith to carry the church. You must count every coin. That night you sit alone in your study, the ring casting a crescent shadow on the parchment as you compose a letter to a distant bishop. You pause, the quill poised, and look again at your own hand. The ring reflects the flicker of a single candle, and in that flame, you see the truth. This is not just a symbol of divine favor. It is the weight of 1,000 unseen bargains, and it is only beginning to press into the flesh. By morning, the air is already thick with heat, and the scent of wax, sweat, and burning oil hangs like a curtain over the papal apartments. The windows have been thrown wide to catch the breeze from the Tiber, but no wind comes. You sit at your desk before a letter sealed with the mark of a crusading order. It is stained with dust and smudged with urgency. They beg for coin, for weapons, for absolution, and above all, for the endorsement of the Holy Father to march once more toward Jerusalem. You unroll the parchment slowly, though you know its contents already. The language is always the same: valor, faith, destiny. But behind the noble phrases lie men dying of thirst, cities burned to ash, and ledgers that hemorrhage gold. Your chancellor enters with a list of current obligations: cathedrals in disrepair, monasteries on the verge of closure, orphans fed only twice a week. He says this softly, respectfully, as though the needs of the living were a vulgar distraction from the ambitions of the divine. The crusade fund is nearly empty, he confesses. The coffers are drained from previous campaigns that yielded no cities, only graves. The nobles who once pledged to fund the endeavor have since grown silent. Some fell in battle, others broke their vows. The treasury borrowed from bankers in Genoa and Florence to cover the last round of supplies. The church now owes interest on grace. Still, the cardinals are divided. Some call the crusade a holy necessity. Others see it as a ruinous vanity. You hear their voices echo from the outer hall even now, some raised in righteous conviction, others in quiet despair. You rise and pace the room, one hand trailing along the stone windowsill. You remember the day you were elected, when the college whispered that a new crusade would restore the moral authority of the papacy. And yet here you are, unable to find funds even to bury your own dead. The scrolls on your desk detail unpaid wages for crusaders who returned broken and penniless. One letter includes a crude drawing of a severed hand with the words, "This is all he brought back from the East." You know what must be done: a new tithe, another appeal to the faithful. The preaching of indulgences will begin again. Salvation in exchange for coin. You draft the bull that will authorize the campaign. You write of duty and honor, of sins washed clean by sacrifice. And as you seal it with your ring, the wax hisses like a wound being cauterized. You know you will be praised in sermons, your name sung by those who dream of banners fluttering over Jerusalem's walls. But your nights will be haunted by what is not written in the proclamation: the debt, the compromise, the nameless thousands you will send to rot in distant dust. You gaze out over Rome, the city bathed in gold from the low sun. Somewhere below, a child cries out and a merchant haggles for bread. You wonder what they would pay to die in your name. The marble floor of the consistory room is cool beneath your sandals as you take your seat on the elevated throne. Before you stretch rows of cardinals in crimson robes, their expressions carefully composed, their hands folded in ritual grace. But beneath the silk lies the steel. You know it now. These men did not gather around you because they believed in your piety. They gathered because you offered them something: a promise, a position, a delay in judgment. The same hands that once lifted you up can now pull you down, and they will, if you falter. The weight of their eyes bears down harder than the Triple Crown ever did. Their questions today are polite, procedural. A bishop's misconduct in Bavaria, the reorganization of a diocesan council in Aragon. But beneath every inquiry is an unstated challenge. Every word they speak is a blade passed across a whetstone, and every answer you give must be measured, balanced, strong, but never arrogant. You are their pope, but never forget, you were their choice. One of them, a man you once considered an ally, leans forward with a soft question that carries the weight of a guillotine. He asks about the rumored appointment of your own nephew to a curial post. You feel your blood rise. You had spoken of this in private, in confidence, with another cardinal whose smile now gives nothing away. You glance across the room and see a flicker of satisfaction in one corner. Someone testing your nerves, waiting to see if the new pontiff will crack. You steady your voice and respond with tact, citing merit, precedent, the need for trusted hands. They nod, but their silence carries far more than their words. You have been warned. That evening, you dine alone, the sounds of the city beyond your window muted by thick velvet curtains. The golden plate before you holds fish and oil and bread with olives. You pick at it without hunger. Your appetite fades beneath the weight of watching your back. There was once a time when you imagined the College of Cardinals as a circle of learned men, shepherds of the faith. Now you understand the truth. They are courtiers in red, masters of influence, and each one carries a knife he will not hesitate to use. The only question is whether it will be thrust into your back or your hand. Later, your confessor visits. You speak in cautious phrases, hinting at the venom swirling in your own court. He listens, nods, then quotes scripture about patience, suffering, and divine justice. But as he leaves, he reminds you, gently, that the confessional is sacred, yet the walls have ears. You retire to your chamber with a bitter taste in your mouth, the candlelight flickering against your polished ring. You trace its edge, wondering if it will outlast your friendships. You no longer fear heresy or schism, not tonight. You fear the silence of allies who no longer smile. The greatest danger to any pope has never come from beyond Rome. It has always sat in the seat beside him. By morning, the Vatican corridors are already stirring with soft-footed messengers, scribes bearing scrolls, and bishops lingering with purpose. The day's appointments begin with a series of local clergy requesting audiences, and you recognize them not by their names, but by their reputations. One bishop is known for his eloquent sermons and lavish feasts. Another, a newly minted archdeacon, comes draped in fine velvet, a gift, no doubt, from some grateful family hoping to buy a place at God's table. They smile, kneel, kiss your ring. But behind every bow is a calculation. They speak of devotion, but their eyes scan your expression for signs of favor. They want positions, exemptions, wealth. Some are too bold to even hide it. A man from Naples offers a donation large enough to renovate a crumbling cathedral, but only if his cousin is made bishop of a newly created see. You pause. The offer is not written, not spoken directly, but its meaning is unmistakable. You do not answer. You simply dismiss him with a nod. But the stain of it remains. You retreat to your private study and call for your secretary, requesting records of recent appointments and donations. The scrolls are brought in thick bundles. You unroll one and trace your finger down the names. Bishops elevated under your predecessor, many of them coinciding with sudden inflows of gold from noble houses. Another shows a curious surge in contributions following certain doctrinal rulings. It is all carefully cloaked, nothing written in plain speech. But the pattern is clear. Simony, selling sacred offices, has never vanished. It has only grown more artful, more expensive, more deeply rooted. You had hoped to reform it. Now you're not even sure where to begin. At the afternoon consistory, the discussion turns to ecclesiastical appointments abroad. A cardinal praises the fervor of a young cleric in Burgundy. Another speaks warmly of a bishop's son in Provence who has shown potential in Rome. No one mentions money, but the coin gleams behind every compliment. You watch them maneuver, laying verbal bricks for their candidate's ascent. You consider objecting, but you hold your tongue. You remember the votes. You remember the debts. Every time you speak, you weigh your authority against what it might cost you to wield it. To oppose one cardinal may win you a principal. To oppose three may win you exile in your own palace. That evening, after Vespers, you walk the cloisters alone. The light fades behind the arches, casting long shadows on the walls. Somewhere, a monk sings softly in Latin, his voice thin and wavering. You pause by the fountain and feel the cool spray of water on your hand. You think of Peter, poor and barefoot, chosen by Christ, and then you think of yourself, draped in silk, courted by princes, caught in a web of favors that would make Judas blush. You whisper a prayer for clarity, but what you hear instead is the echo of coins clinking on stone. And you know, until the last ring is kissed, until the last purse is passed, simony will remain not a sin of the fringe, but the lifeblood of power. The banquet is a grand affair. Candles blaze from silver sconces, casting golden light over long tables lined with the most powerful men in Christendom. The air is thick with spice and roasted meat, and the low drone of a dozen conversations rises like incense toward the vaulted ceiling. You sit at the head of it all, raised slightly above the rest, your plate untouched, and your smile carefully measured. This is no celebration. This is a theater of masks, a ritual of presence. The cardinals to your right murmur compliments about the venison. The nobles to your left chuckle at the well-timed jests of a court poet. But no one here is relaxed. Every word spoken is a signal, every glance across the table a message. You can feel it in the stiffness of their backs, in the weight of silence between phrases. They are watching you as much as each other, and beneath every toast lies a calculation. A dish of figs is placed before you, soaked in honey and scattered with almonds. You take one slowly, while a bishop from Florence leans in to whisper something about land disputes near a monastery. You nod, noting how his fingers flick toward a minor noble further down the table. Nothing is direct. Nothing ever is. Later, a cardinal raises his goblet and proposes a toast to your wise and measured rule. Around the hall, others lift their cups with quiet obedience. But you notice who drinks and who merely lifts their cup to their lips. You notice who locks eyes with you and who lets their gaze drift toward the shadows. As the feast drags into its third hour, entertainers file in, musicians, jugglers, a choir of orphan boys in borrowed vestments. The crowd applauds, but their attention remains on one another. A noble from Sicily approaches with a small gift, a golden reliquary, he claims, holding the finger bone of a saint. You accept it with practiced gratitude, even as your stomach turns. You'll have it tested later. Too many of these holy artifacts turn out to be no more than trinkets wrapped in velvet and lies. You excuse yourself before the final course and retreat down a side corridor. The hall behind you erupts with polite laughter at some clever verse. Alone now, you breathe deeply, the air cool and clean compared to the perfumed haze you left behind. A servant finds you minutes later and offers a note, folded, unmarked, sealed in plain wax. Inside is a single line, written in a familiar hand. We remember every favor you promised. No signature, no need for one. You tear it in half and let the pieces fall into a nearby brazier. Back in your chamber, you remove your papal stole and hang it with care. Your body aches from the performance. You sit in the dark and wonder who, if anyone, enjoyed the feast. The papacy, you've learned, is not a banquet of brothers. It is a table of wolves where each fork shines bright, but the blades are hidden under the linen. The candle burns low on your writing desk, its pool of wax spreading slowly over a cracked wooden groove near the edge. The parchment before you is blank, crisp, waiting. Your hand hovers above it, quill poised like a blade. Outside, the bells of Santa Maria ring the hour, and the echoes seem to press in against the glass. The letter you must write tonight concerns the fate of an entire diocese. A dispute has erupted between two bishops, one accusing the other of withholding relics and forging indulgences, the other claiming political sabotage by imperial agents. The truth, as always, is buried beneath layers of loyalty, rumor, and fear. Both men are powerful, both are dangerous, and you must decide who is holy and who is heretic with a stroke of your pen. You shift in your chair, its ancient joints creaking beneath your weight. Every pope signs such letters, they tell you. It is a duty, a tradition. But you feel none of the sacred gravity they describe in their treatises. Only the cold edge of consequence. One wrong phrase, one poorly chosen word, and you could unleash violence in lands you will never set foot in. Villages could burn. Priests could be torn from their pulpits. Thousands could suffer, all from what you write here, in solitude, with ink made from crushed ash and iron salts. You dip your quill again and begin the salutation in solemn Latin. The script comes slowly tonight, as though your very body resists the burden of authority. A knock at the door startles you. A servant enters quietly, bows, and leaves a second scroll on the table before withdrawing. This one bears the seal of a distant monastery, one you visited in your youth when your cassock was new and your heart was not yet worn thin by politics. The abbot writes to you now in trembling script, begging for aid. Bandits have raided their farmland twice this month. Their stores are empty. Several brothers are ill. You stare at the letter for a long time, longer than you intended. No one is watching, but still you feel shame. You know this request will be buried under larger priorities: cathedrals, military tithes, foreign diplomacy. You write a note of encouragement, a blessing. No coin. There is none to spare. When you sign it, you pause again to look at your name. Not the one you were born with, but the one chosen for your pontificate. It no longer feels like your own. By midnight, the letter to the bishops is complete. It is careful, firm, balanced. It condemns, but gently. It absolves, but conditionally. You pass it to your secretary without a word. He will seal it in wax and send it across the mountains. Somewhere, men will read it and act. And you will never know the full price of your words. As the candle finally gutters out, you press your fingers to your temple and realize the truth. It is not the crown that makes a pope, it is the quill, and every time it touches parchment, a soul is lifted or crushed. The sanctuary at night is not quiet the way you once imagined it would be. It breathes. It groans. The wind presses through the high stone arches, moaning like the voice of an old man long forgotten. The flicker of the sanctuary lamp throws trembling shadows across the carved saints, making them seem to shift and turn when you're not watching. You came here, after the last servant extinguished the hallway torches, seeking comfort, seeking stillness. But the stillness of this place is not comforting. It presses against your chest, as though the air itself carries the weight of past regrets. You kneel on the hard stone before the altar, hands folded, lips murmuring a half-remembered psalm. But your mind cannot focus. The words fall apart in your mouth. Not even the rhythm of prayer can still the unrest inside you. Behind you, the chapel doors are closed, yet you feel as if someone is watching. You know it is foolish. There are guards posted at the end of the corridor, but still the sensation persists. You do not turn around. Instead, you bow lower, resting your forehead against your folded hands. You ask for clarity, for rest, for a single night without fear or calculation. The only answer is the creak of ancient timbers above and the dry hiss of wind finding its way through the cracked windows. Even here in the house of God, you are not alone, not in the way you need to be. The marble beneath your knees is cold and unyielding. You feel it through the thin fabric of your robe, grounding you in a body that aches more with each passing day. You remember, in brief flashes, the sermons of your youth, where the sanctuary was described as a haven, a place untouched by the outside world. Now you know better. There is no such place, not for a pope. The world seeps in through every wall, every candle flame, every whispered petition delivered at dawn. The sanctuary is not safe. It is simply where the burdens echo more loudly, no longer drowned out by politics or pageantry. You rise slowly, joints stiff, and approach the altar. Upon it lies a gilded crucifix, its figure of Christ worn smooth from centuries of reverent touch. You place your hand upon it, not as a gesture of devotion, but for steadiness. You whisper the same question you have asked every night since your elevation. Am I worthy? The silence that follows is heavy, dense, impenetrable. You don't expect an answer anymore. Perhaps that is its own answer. As you turn to leave, the sanctuary seems to breathe once more. You pause at the door, casting one last glance back at the altar. The candle still burns, small and defiant, but its light feels fragile tonight, like a hope stretched too thin. You return to your chamber, no more rested than when you came, and as you lie awake in the dark, listening to the groan of stone and the beating of your own heart, You understand that the sanctuary is not where a pope finds peace. It is where he learns how much peace he has lost. The parchment lies open across your lap as you sit in the private library, the ink barely dry, the words still warm with controversy. It's a letter from a bishop in the north, eloquent, cautious, but unmistakably provocative. He asks whether certain ancient dogmas might be reinterpreted, whether the mystery of transubstantiation could be explained differently for a new generation. He speaks of metaphors and symbols, of the Holy Spirit moving not just through sacraments, but through questioning hearts. You read it twice, then a third time, each phrase weighing heavier than the last. He has couched it well. No heresy on the surface, but the implications lie just beneath, and you know what they are. He is not just asking for guidance. He is testing your boundaries. And if you answer wrong, your papacy will fracture along the old lines of fire and ash. You lean back in the chair, the stiff spine groaning under your weight, and let your eyes scan the shelves of doctrine surrounding you. So many decrees, so many bulls, some written by men whose bones now lie under dust, whose truths were once unshakable until the world shifted beneath them. You've read the texts. You've seen the annotations in the margins, scribbled by monks with ink-stained fingers and troubled souls. Some were praised in their day, only to be condemned by the next pope. You wonder if your own thoughts, your own choices, will someday be footnotes to a heresy trial. You want to answer carefully. You must. But in your heart, a different struggle burns. What if he is right? What if the bishop is not sowing doubt, but revealing a truth long buried beneath the fear of error? Outside, the wind whistles low through the stone columns. Rome prepares for rain. You hear the footsteps of a clerk delivering more letters, more questions, more burdens. But you remain still. You trace your finger along the edge of the parchment. This single letter could be your downfall, or your legacy. You could condemn the bishop outright, reaffirm orthodoxy, and silence the tremors before they become cracks. That is what your predecessors might have done. It would be clean, swift, final, but it would also be dishonest. Because you remember the day you too asked questions that had no room in the catechism. You remember the confessor who told you that faith meant silence and obedience was a virtue even when it burned. You dip your quill, hand steady despite the doubt that churns inside you, and begin your reply. You do not condemn. You do not affirm. You write with precision, with caution, offering light without warmth, permission without invitation. You tell yourself it is the wisest path, but as the ink dries, you feel it, like a scar opening anew. Doctrine, you realize, is not a shield. It is a wound dressed over, again and again, never allowed to heal. And you are now the hand that must dress it, even as it bleeds beneath your touch. The envoy arrives just before Vespers, cloaked in black and smelling faintly of rain and horses. His boots are caked with travel and his eyes sunken with the weight of grief or guilt. He brings with him a velvet pouch of gold and a letter sealed in green wax, marked with the crest of a prominent noble family from the Western Territories. The letter is brief. A man has died. A duke. The circumstances are unclear. Something about a skirmish gone wrong, a fire that claimed an abbey, villagers mistaken for rebels. The truth, it seems, lies somewhere between misjudgment and massacre. Now the widow writes on her husband's behalf, asking for papal forgiveness, for the remission of his sins, and for burial in consecrated ground. Enclosed is a gift for the church, she writes, for restoration, for remembrance, for redemption. You turn the pouch over in your hands after the envoy leaves, feeling the weight of it shift, coin pressing against coin. It is not an unusual offering. This happens more than most would believe. Crimes committed in shadow, atoned for in gold. The theology is sound. The Church teaches that penance must be made, and those with means may express their sorrow through alms. But tonight, as the bell calls the city to prayer, you feel that teaching begin to sag beneath its own weight. You set the pouch down and look out the window. The clouds have rolled in and the rooftops glisten with a wet sheen. Somewhere beneath them, peasants kneel for evening mass, mouths forming prayers for sins no one will ever hear. Their transgressions will not buy forgiveness in bags of coin. Their only penance is suffering. Your secretary asks what to do with the letter. It has not yet been entered into the registry. You tell him to wait. You need time. But what you really need is certainty. And it eludes you more with each passing day. You walk to the chapel alone and sit in the last pew, watching the altar flicker in the candlelight. You think of the widow, probably draped in mourning silks, saying prayers with a clear conscience now that the money has changed hands. You wonder if she knows the names of the villagers her husband's men put to the torch. You wonder if she would care. When you return to your chamber, the pouch is still there, unopened. You pour the coins into a shallow dish and run your fingers through them. They are newly minted, clean, unblemished. You can almost forget where they came from. Almost. At your desk, you write the response. Forgiveness granted. Burial approved. You affix your seal with a heavy hand. It is the right thing, the practical thing. The money will repair a leaking roof in a monastery near Naples. It will buy food for an orphanage in the countryside. It will save lives. And still, as you sit in the dark, the bowl of gold gleaming on the table, you feel a chill settle deep in your chest. Because some sins can be paid for. But others are only passed along. And you have just become their courier. You descend into the vault beneath the apostolic palace with only a lantern and the company of silence. The air down here is thick with damp stone and the scent of old ink, beeswax, and decay. The archivist leads you past shelves so ancient they bow beneath the weight of centuries, where papal bulls sleep in neat bundles tied with faded ribbons. This is the hidden heart of the Church, not in its marble altars or golden chalices, but in the scrolls that contain every edict, every curse, every blessing issued in the name of God by those who wore your crown. The archivist says nothing as he unlocks a cedar cabinet and gestures for you to enter. Inside are documents few have touched since they were sealed. Letters written by popes during excommunications, confessions during heresy trials, secret decrees signed in blood and fear. He leaves you alone. That was the request. You open the first bundle with care. The vellum crackles faintly in your hands. The writing is precise, unflinching. A pope denounces a king for adultery, invoking hell with such confidence it feels like a sword being drawn. The next scroll, dated just months later, is addressed to the same king, this time begging for his army's aid in a neighboring conflict. You set it aside. The contradiction is not surprising. You've already learned that papal authority must often lean into diplomacy masked as doctrine. Still, the clarity of the hypocrisy unsettles you. You read a missive from a previous pontiff who ordered the silencing of a visionary nun whose prophecies challenged Rome's authority. Her letter is here too, carefully preserved, filled with trembling ink and holy fire. She claimed to speak with angels. She died in confinement. No one ever canonized her. Further down the shelf, you find an entry signed by your own predecessor. A secret compromise with a merchant guild. He permitted the transport of arms to a warring kingdom in exchange for shipping access and tribute. The ink is smeared near the signature, as though his hand hesitated. You feel a pang of kinship with him, a man once condemned for being too political, now a cautionary name whispered in sermons. You understand now that every pope inherits not only doctrine, but debts. not only faith, but fallout. You sit on a worn bench, the lantern casting long shadows behind the scrolls. You listen to the vault breathe. In the silence, it begins to speak. Not with words, but with weight, with memory, with judgment. These were men like you, each believing, at least in the beginning, that they could steer the church with wisdom and grace. Most failed, some compromised, a few burned, but all of them left behind a trail of choices too heavy to carry in life, buried here in script and wax. As you close the cabinet and prepare to leave, you glance back once more. The scrolls are dark now, hidden in shadow, but you know what they contain. And you know, someday, your words will be added to theirs. Another voice in the vault, another name in the silence, another man who tried. The cloister garden is quiet this morning, the kind of stillness that feels more like anticipation than peace. A gentle mist clings to the stone paths, softening the outline of the cypress trees, muting the sound of your footsteps. You walk here every dawn, following the same loop past the fountain and under the archway where a marble saint raises his hand in eternal benediction. But today, you are not alone. A figure in a dark habit stands by the olive tree near the edge of the colonnade. Your confessor. He bows slightly, hands folded into his sleeves. You nod in return, knowing he has been waiting. The two of you walk in silence for a while. You've come to value these quiet exchanges, the absence of courtly language, the lack of pretense. He has heard your sins, he knows your fears, and yet there is always a distance between you, one sharpened by what he represents. Not just a man of God, but a servant of the inner network. You don't speak of it directly, but you know. Every confession you've made may be safe under canon law, but not under the weight of politics. There are ears in every corner of this palace, and the confessor hears more than anyone. Some things he carries to his grave. Others, you suspect, he carries straight to the cardinals. He begins speaking softly about the unrest in Milan, a bishop rumored to be harboring heretics. You reply with vague approval for investigation, choosing your words carefully. He offers a suggestion. Perhaps the bishop should be reassigned before scandal brews. It's an innocuous proposal on the surface. But you hear it, the shift in tone, the nudge behind the words. This is not just spiritual counsel. This is maneuvering. The bishop in question opposed your election. You wonder if this is advice or an offer to remove a threat with holy justification. You do not answer immediately. Back in your study, you sit with the memory of the conversation replaying in your mind. You've spoken to the confessor of your doubts, your weariness, your regret. You've shared memories of childhood, of the first time you felt the call to serve. And now you question which of those stories have made their way to other ears. A few days prior, a cardinal quoted one of your private reflections, almost word for word. Coincidence, perhaps, but nothing in Rome is coincidence. You look at the crucifix on the wall, once a source of comfort, now a witness to your isolation. Later that night, you summon your secretary and order the reassignment of the bishop. You do not mention the conversation. You do not mention the confessor. You simply sign the decree, press your seal into the wax, and hand it over. You have learned not to leave traces of your suspicions. Trust is a currency you can no longer afford to spend freely, and as the candles burn low and the shadows grow long, you return to the chapel, not to confess, but to sit in silence. You do not speak. You do not pray. You only listen, wondering whether the ears of God are still listening, or if they've already been replaced by men in robes who write down every word. The letter arrives at midday, creased and soot-stained, bearing the wax seal of a patriarch whose name you only half recognize. It was delivered by a courier who has already vanished into the streets before the ink of his name was entered into your log. You open it slowly, wary of what news could be sent with such haste and so little formality. The parchment smells of oil and ash, and the handwriting is cramped, written by a trembling hand on horseback or worse. The letter is brief but dense, filled with names of towns you've never seen and titles of clergymen long absent from your memory. But one thing is unmistakable. War has returned to the eastern provinces, and this time it brings not only swords, but pestilence. A city has burned, another is under siege. Monks are being dragged from their sanctuaries and strung up in town squares. The letter ends not with a plea, but with a phrase that leaves your chest hollow. If we fall, know that we did not fall quietly. You sit with the letter for a long time, its folds open on your lap, your eyes drifting toward the shuttered window. The sky is strangely quiet, the light outside filtered through smoke from distant fields burning outside the city. Rome itself is not yet under threat, but the air carries the scent of scorched earth, and something about it sets your teeth on edge. You rise and summon your advisors, reading the letter aloud to them in a voice that does not tremble, though your hands do. Their reactions are a mixture of calculation and disbelief. One speaks of the need for a formal inquiry. Another recommends a slow and cautious response. After all, how much of this can be verified? You recognize the dance. Every moment of hesitation buys time, delays responsibility, and avoids commitment. But you also know that time, once lost, does not return. That evening you sit by the fire, rereading the letter, while your secretary drafts a statement for the College of Cardinals. It will be carefully worded, full of holy concern and diplomatic neutrality. It will say enough to be remembered, but not enough to require immediate action. You stare into the flames, wondering how many souls will be lost by the time the ink dries. You think of the papal legates you once sent to those provinces, cheerful and bold, certain of their mission. Are they still alive? Would they write you now if they could? Before retiring, you light a small candle and carry it into the chapel. You kneel before the altar, not to pray, but to listen. You are hoping for something, a sign, a voice, even silence with meaning. But all you hear is the soft crackle of wax melting down. You leave the candle burning behind you. Let it be seen by whatever eyes remain in the east. Let them know that Rome is still awake, even if it does not yet know how to act. You walk back to your chamber, knowing that fire travels faster than faith, and the smoke, once it rises, cannot be called back. The procession winds its way through the streets of Rome, a river of silk and steel, incense and song. Trumpets blare above the crowd, echoing off stone facades adorned with banners bearing your crest. Children are lifted onto shoulders, their hands outstretched toward your white-robed figure, as if touching your sleeve might heal some hidden hurt. Women cast flowers beneath your litter. Men press their foreheads to the ground. From above, it looks like adoration. From where you sit, high on the ceremonial chair, it feels like a trap. Every face is turned toward you, but not all of them are smiling. Not all of them belong to the faithful. Your papal tiara gleams in the sunlight, and it weighs differently today, more like armor than ornament. The breeze carries voices to your ears, fragments of prayer, but also something sharper. A hiss? A murmur? You scan the crowd as discreetly as you can, your pulse tightening. Guards flank the edges of the street, hands on hilts, eyes always moving. You were warned this morning by your chamberlain. An anonymous letter had arrived, unsealed, unsigned. Just 3 words scratched into the vellum. You are watched. No threat, no name, just a certainty. And in this city, that is all it takes. As you pass beneath the arch of Constantine, your mind turns not to scripture, but to history. How many emperors once rode these same roads, waving to crowds while fearing the knife behind a smile. You are not a general. You are not a king. But today you are treated as both, and that is what makes it dangerous. Power here does not invite reverence. It invites rivalry. Somewhere in the crowd could be a radical monk who thinks you are the Antichrist, a noble with a vendetta buried under layers of obedience, or worse, a cardinal with ambitions better served by your funeral than your favor. You reach the basilica just before noon, the square roaring like a sea. As you descend from the chair and ascend the steps alone, your vestments flutter in the wind, and the eyes of Rome follow your every movement. Your blessing must be flawless, your gesture unwavering. The cross you raise above your head is more than a symbol, it is a shield. You deliver the benediction, voice clear and steady, while your heart pounds so loudly you fear the crowd might hear it. They cheer, they chant your name, but even their devotion cannot silence the question in your mind: who among them waits for your weakness? Later, in the quiet of your private chamber, you peel the robes from your body as if shedding a second skin. Beneath the layers of gold thread and embroidered silk, you are sweating, trembling slightly. A servant brings you water but says nothing of your pale face. He knows better. In this place, fear is as common as incense. You stare at your reflection in the basin. Pope, pontiff, father of Christendom. But also, just a man who knows that being crowned in glory does not make you safe. It only makes you visible. And the visible are always vulnerable. The courier who brings the news is breathless, his robe stained with dust and sweat. He kneels before you, head bowed, voice trembling, as he recounts the scene. Blood on the altar steps of a cathedral in Florence. A murdered priest found face down in the nave before morning mass. You listen without interruption, your fingers tightening slowly around the carved armrest of your chair. The room is still, the light filtered through tall windows, casting golden lines across the stone floor. Outside, the city moves as always, vendors calling, bells ringing, carts rolling past. But here, in this chamber, something has shifted. A servant of God lies dead in his own church, and the motives are unclear. Political, they say, or perhaps heretical, or perhaps just madness, the kind that festers in cities where power and resentment run side by side through every alley. You dismiss the courier gently and rise from your chair. The chamberlain is already waiting with names. A bishop in Florence known for stirring tempers, a noble family with long-standing grievances, a group of monks rumored to preach outside church lines. He offers you a quill. He assumes you will write a condemnation, a letter of rebuke, something loud enough to silence dissent and reaffirm your reach. But you hesitate. You know what this moment requires: not righteousness, but calculation. A strong hand can steady the flock, yes, but too strong a grip and they scatter. You pace the chamber slowly, your robes brushing the polished floor. You think of the murdered priest. You wonder if he had seen it coming, if he had begged, if he had screamed. By the afternoon, a delegation from the Florentine clergy arrives. They come with bowed heads and guarded expressions, one eye always on the others. Their voices are measured, careful. They speak of grief, of justice, of loyalty to the Holy See. But they also make requests: swift action, a new bishop, funds for a purification ceremony. You grant them blessings, nod with solemnity, but your eyes search their faces for something else. Guilt, fear, ambition. You find traces of all three. That night, you walk alone to the papal chapel. The altar there is bare, adorned only by a single white cloth and a simple silver cross. You kneel and try to pray, but the words do not come. All you see in your mind is the altar in Florence, red with blood, the body of a man who thought he was safe in the house of God. The image will not leave you. You understand now, more than ever, that sanctity does not protect, it merely marks a target. You rise and blow out the candle, the smoke curling toward the darkened ceiling. The weight of judgment rests on your shoulders, heavier than any crown. You return to your chamber and draft your statement. It speaks of sorrow and unity, of standing firm against evil. But as you press your seal into the wax, you feel the cold truth in your bones. The altar is no longer sacred. Not in Florence, not here. Blood has found its way to the holy places, and it will not stop at one. The corridors of the apostolic palace are warm with torchlight and lined with frescoes painted in devotion, their saints frozen mid-blessing, their halos gleaming with powdered gold. The floors are polished marble, the furniture carved from ancient walnut. The ceilings stretch so high that your voice gets lost in them. And yet, the deeper you walk into this place, the more it feels like a cage. Not the kind built of bars, but of obligations. The walls are not meant to keep danger out. They're meant to hold you in. There are guards stationed discreetly at every archway, and while they are loyal, their eyes are always watching. The courtyards are beautiful, yes, but they are walled. The gardens fragrant, but walled. The gates are ornate and heavy, and you do not carry the keys. You wake each morning to the sounds of prayer, bells, and the shuffle of slippers in stone corridors. Your meals are prepared in silence, brought on silver trays, set beside notes from emissaries and requests from cardinals. You eat in solitude more often than not. The papacy demands distance. A pope too familiar invites manipulation. A pope too remote invites revolt. And so you walk a narrow line, where every word you speak is measured, and every silence speaks louder than speech. You cannot attend a simple mass without preparation, a train of attendants, and a dozen armed guards in plain robes. You cannot sit beside a fire without wondering who placed the logs or which hand poured the wine in your cup. Even comfort is suspect here. You once thought power meant freedom, that rising to the highest throne in Christendom would mean your days were your own. Instead, your schedule is laid out by others. Meetings, audiences, councils, processions, each with its own etiquette, its own dangers. You cannot cancel one without offending someone. You cannot attend one without aligning with someone else. Even your moments of reflection are shadowed by the knowledge that somewhere, in some back room of the Curia, someone is asking why you have not yet addressed this matter or that crisis. You live surrounded by beauty, and yet there are days you would trade it all for a moment of honest quiet, without judgment, without expectation. At night, your chamber is still, but even then, the stillness is not yours. You hear footsteps in the hallway, guards on patrol, servants returning empty trays, clerks whispering too softly for you to catch the words. The tapestries rustle faintly with drafts that shouldn't exist, and sometimes you swear you hear someone stop just outside your door and wait. For what? You do not know. Perhaps they're just listening. You lie in your bed, beneath linen sheets embroidered with your title, staring up at a ceiling painted with scenes of heaven. But the paradise above you feels distant, almost mocking, because here in the heart of the Vatican, clothed in white and wreathed in gold, you are not free. You are kept, adored by the world, feared by rulers, bowed to by thousands, and utterly imprisoned in a gilded dungeon whose doors may never truly open again. The keys of St. Peter rest on the velvet cushion beside your throne, gleaming in the candlelight, their golden curves symbolic of authority both sacred and eternal. You held them in your hands during the coronation, felt their cold weight pressed into your palms by the dean of cardinals who whispered the ancient phrase, receive the keys of the kingdom. The moment was meant to be profound, divine, final. But now, sitting alone in your chamber, you look at them and feel nothing. They are ceremonial, of course. No door in this palace is opened by them, no cell unlocked, no heart swayed. They are a metaphor you were expected to carry like a sword. And yet all around you are doors you cannot open. A letter from Constantinople lies unopened on your desk. The emperor's seal is still intact, unbroken. The patriarch wishes to discuss reconciliation between the Eastern and Western churches, a subject as old and brittle as the bones of saints. You already know the contents before you read them. Formal overtures, doctrinal caveats, and beneath it all, the throb of politics, not unity. You know how this will unfold. You'll send a gracious response filled with prayers and platitudes. A committee will be formed, debates will be held, and nothing will change. Because the locks are not made of iron, but of centuries of mistrust and ego, and the keys in your hands are shaped all wrong. In another drawer is a request from a bishop in Iberia. He asks for intervention in a dispute between Christian knights and a local abbot over land seized during the Reconquista. You could issue a decree. You could side with the abbot or with the knights. But both have already written to their respective monarchs. And those monarchs have already written to you. Your ruling will not decide the matter. It will merely confirm who already holds the stronger sword. So you hesitate, you draft a response, you change it, you cross it out, you wait. You learn quickly that the illusion of power is as binding as power itself. You walk the halls of the apostolic palace that evening, past doors that have been closed to you since your elevation, rooms now guarded, conversations now conducted without your presence. You pass a meeting chamber where cardinals confer behind etched glass, and you do not interrupt. Once you believed they would defer to you out of respect. Now you know they defer when it suits them, and proceed without you when it does not. Later in the chapel, you kneel before the tabernacle and place the symbolic keys on the cold marble rail. You close your eyes and whisper a prayer, not for strength or wisdom, but for clarity. What are you meant to unlock? A church tangled in its own ritual? A world deaf to sermons and numb to sacraments? The silence answers nothing. You retrieve the keys, return to your chamber, and place them back on the cushion. They shine with promise. But you understand now, these keys open nothing. They only weigh you down. The banners outside your window ripple in the breeze, bright with saints and Latin phrases painted in bold, authoritative hand. The city is preparing for a holy festival, and pilgrims are arriving by the hundreds, many with blistered feet and purses emptied on the road. You watch from above as they pass beneath the archways, some singing, others silent, each one seeking something: healing, absolution, grace. In the square, a preacher from the Dominican order raises his arms and proclaims that salvation can be granted with a coin and a prayer. His voice rings clear. His words are careful. He does not say that indulgences can be bought. He simply implies it, strongly. Later, your chamberlain presents the figures. Donations have tripled since the indulgence campaign began. Cathedrals long delayed are now within reach of completion. Monasteries can afford food again. Even the crusade coffers, once dry as bone, now echo with clinking coin. He smiles as he delivers this news, but you cannot meet his eyes. You remember the meeting months ago when the idea was first revived. A cardinal suggested it gently, a temporary measure, a renewal of an old practice. It worked before, he said, and the people understand it. You had nodded then, not in agreement, but in surrender. You walk through the treasury later, the shelves stacked high with chests and scrolls listing names and amounts. Some gave copper, some gave silver. A few gave gold enough to feed entire provinces. Each donation marked by a promise of reduced time in purgatory, each soul purchased inch by inch. A monk from Avignon recorded these grants, his pen scratching diligently through the parchment as he tallied sin against coin. You watched him once, as he paused mid-line and whispered a prayer. Or perhaps it was an apology. A merchant's letter arrives that evening, thanking you for the indulgence granted to his dying wife. He promises to build a chapel in her name. You fold the letter with care and set it aside, unsure whether to feel sorrow or relief. This man has found comfort. His pain has been softened by ritual and silver. Who are you to challenge that? And yet you cannot ignore the lingering voice in your mind, the echo of a sermon you heard as a boy, warning that the soul is not a debt to be paid, but a mystery to be lived. At night, you walk to the basilica alone. The lamps burn low, the shadows gather. You pause beneath the fresco of the Last Judgment and look up at the damned being pulled downward, the saints ascending. You wonder if they too had receipts. If the line between redemption and transaction was always this thin, you kneel, you pray. But your voice is quiet, unsure. You were chosen to offer forgiveness, to shepherd the fallen back toward light. But somewhere along the way, the light dimmed and the path turned to gold. And now, in the silence of your cathedral, you wonder whether you are guiding souls toward salvation or simply selling them a seat by the fire. The throne sits at the far end of the consistorial hall, raised on 3 marble steps and draped in gold-embroidered cloth. When you ascend it, all eyes turn towards you. The cardinals in their scarlet folds, the ambassadors in fine velvet, the guards as still as statues. It is a throne of power, yes, but one that grips tighter than any crown. You sit straight-backed, your hands resting gently on the arms, but inside, your muscles lock beneath the weight of ceremonial expectation. It is not just the wood beneath you. It is the centuries that came before, the decisions that hang in the air like unseen chains, each one fastened by the men whose names fill the scrolls below the basilica floor. A delegate from Hungary steps forward, bowing deeply before delivering a speech filled with flattery, veiled complaints, and political demands. He praises your wisdom, your holiness, your lineage, then asks for the removal of an archbishop accused of treason. You listen patiently, smile faintly, and thank him for his concern. You do not answer, not here, not in front of so many eyes. Behind you, a cardinal clears his throat, signaling his disapproval or perhaps merely drawing attention to his presence. It doesn't matter. Everything is symbolic now. Every gesture interpreted, every silence weaponized. The audience ends and you retire to your private chamber, the scent of incense still clinging to your robes. You remove the stole from your shoulders, but the weight lingers. Your secretary hands you a report from the Curia, a list of pending decisions, land disputes, monastery appointments, diplomatic tensions with Sicily. Each item carries with it not just a choice, but a cost. If you resolve one favorably, another faction will rise in protest. If you delay, they will accuse you of weakness. If you act too boldly, you may find yourself isolated, surrounded by men who smile and nod, but quietly remove your supports one by one. That evening, you take a walk along the inner colonnade of the palace, the sunset casting long shadows between the pillars. You stop and rest your hand on a sculpted lion, its mane chipped and worn by time. For a moment, you close your eyes and imagine what it would be like to abdicate, to step down, to walk away, to let another wear the burden you carry. The thought is brief, You already know the answer. There is no escape. Not because you are vain or ambitious, but because the machine is already in motion. The church must have a figurehead. The throne cannot sit empty. And so long as you breathe, you are bound to it. You return to your chamber and stare at the empty chair across from your desk. It is just wood and cloth, but you know its true shape. The throne is not a seat. It is a shackle. It binds you to choices not entirely your own, to voices not always your own, to a history that does not forgive. And each time you sit upon it, you feel the cold iron of duty close, just a little tighter around your spine. The letter arrives at dawn, carried by a pale rider whose horse nearly collapses at the palace gate. The parchment is torn at the edges and smeared with dust and dried wax. The seal belongs to an archbishop, but the tone inside carries no humility. It is a declaration, not a plea. A bishop in the eastern provinces, once obedient, once grateful, now defies your authority. He accuses the papal court of corruption, calls your legates parasites and cassocks, and declares that he will answer only to God, no longer to Rome. He has sent copies of this message to every cathedral in his territory and to the court of a local king who has long held quiet resentment toward papal taxation. In short, he has seceded, and he dares you to stop him. You read the letter 3 times, not because the words are unclear, but because their boldness threatens to shake the ground beneath your feet. You know this man. You remember his quiet demeanor at his ordination. You remember the letter he once wrote praising your leadership in matters of theology. And now he names you a usurper of divine will. The betrayal is not personal. That would be easier. It is structural. It is infectious. If one bishop declares independence, others may follow. The church does not break in thunder. It crumbles in whispers. You summon your advisors. They suggest excommunication, immediate and public, a bull drafted by nightfall. But your chancellor recommends restraint. Wait, he says. Investigate first. There are rumors of unrest in the bishop's city. He may have support. He may have weapons. He may have allies closer than you think. The table falls silent. You are not sure whether their caution is for the good of the church or for their own survival. Either way, the message is clear. If you strike, be sure you will not miss. That evening, you sit by the window and watch a storm roll in over the city. Lightning flashes behind the dome of St. Peter's, illuminating the skyline in bursts. You think of Gregory VII, who stood firm against emperors, and of popes who excommunicated kings without hesitation. But you also think of those who fell, those who overreached, who misjudged the tides of allegiance, who died imprisoned or forgotten. You were taught that the Pope is the rock upon which the church is built, but now you wonder if that rock can crack. You take up your pen and begin drafting a response. Not a condemnation, not yet, a summons. A chance for the bishop to explain himself. A test, not just for him, but for you. Can you afford leniency without appearing weak? Can you hold the reins without pulling too tightly? The ink dries slowly, spreading like a bruise across the page. You place the letter in the care of your most trusted courier, then stand at the chapel door for a long time before entering. You do not kneel. You do not speak. You simply stare at the crucifix and wonder how it feels to be nailed to something by choice. Rebellion wears many faces, and tonight, one of them looks exactly like yours. The choir begins just after sunrise, their voices rising gently through the nave like incense made of breath and memory. From your private gallery above the basilica, you watch as their robes sway in unison, white linen against polished stone, every movement choreographed, every note rising with apparent serenity. To the pilgrims below, this is the sound of heaven. To you, it is something else entirely. You listen closely, not just to the music, but to the weight beneath it. There is sorrow here, woven tightly into the harmonies, threaded through each psalm. You hear not joy, but exhaustion, not praise, but endurance. These boys sing each day, trained from childhood to raise their voices in sacred perfection. And yet, even in this sacred act, the machinery of the church leaves its mark. You know that several of them are sons of minor nobles, offered to the choir not out of piety, but politics. Others were orphans, taken in by monasteries that saw more benefit in voices than in mouths to feed. Some may have believed this service holy at first. Some still might, but their eyes tell you otherwise. You see it when they glance toward the altar, not in awe, but calculation. How much longer must they serve before they are noticed, rewarded, set free? The choir master bows deeply as you descend the stairs after Mass. He asks if the music pleased His Holiness. You give him your blessing, murmur a polite approval. But in your chest, something tightens. You remember your own days as a student of liturgy when you believed music could summon the divine. Now it feels more like decoration, another layer of gold paint over a wall that is beginning to crack. You step back into the sunlight, and the singing fades behind you like a ghost leaving the air. Later that day, you receive a report. A dispute has broken out between two rival monasteries over the rights to a sacred chant, an ancient hymn whose origins are uncertain. Each claims it as their own, their letters thick with doctrine and veiled accusation. You sigh. It is always the same. What begins in devotion ends in property. You assign a legate to investigate, though you already know the outcome. One side will win, the other will grumble. The hymn will be sung as it always has been, but it will never sound the same. That night, as candles flicker low in your chamber, you hear a faint echo from the basilica, a choir boy perhaps, lingering too long in rehearsal. His voice is unaccompanied, tentative, wavering. It carries through the stone like a thread unraveling, and in that fragile note, for just a moment, you hear something unguarded, something true, a flicker of faith not yet worn smooth by duty. It fades quickly, swallowed by silence. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for more. None comes. Only the memory remains of a song meant to rise toward heaven, now trapped beneath a dome that no longer echoes back. The parchment before you is filled with marginalia, dense lines of scripture, canonical footnotes, citations of long-forgotten councils. Theologians have spent weeks debating this single passage, a clause buried deep in a decree issued a century ago, concerning the nature of sin in those born outside the faith. They argue over its intent, its meaning, its possible reinterpretation in light of growing contact with distant, unfamiliar lands. They seek your judgment. They ask for clarity. But as you read the endless scribbled glosses and contending annotations, you wonder whether they want truth or simply permission. The scholars gather in the outer library, a chorus of cloaks and scrolls, each man ready with a quote to prove his position. You listen as they cite Augustine, Aquinas, Origen, spinning spirals of argument that blur together into something dizzying. One insists that salvation must be universal, another that it must be earned. A third warns against innovation. A fourth calls for reform. They all speak in the name of orthodoxy, but you can feel their hands twisting it, reshaping doctrine like wax warmed in fire. You ask them to leave their writings and return tomorrow. You say you need time. They nod, bow, and retreat. But their eyes linger just a moment too long. They know that in the end, your decision will settle the matter. And whatever you choose, someone will whisper the word, heretic. That evening, you sit with the scrolls alone. You reread a commentary by a young cleric whose ideas are brilliant but volatile. He writes of mercy without boundary, of grace outside the visible church. His words are beautiful and dangerous. To approve them would spark outrage among the conservatives. To condemn them would extinguish a voice that might, someday, be remembered as prophetic. But you are not a prophet. You are a pope. And popes are not permitted uncertainty. Your predecessors built this institution brick by doctrinal brick. Now you are expected to maintain the walls, even as they crack under their own weight. Outside, thunder rolls across the hills. Rain begins to drum against the windows. You rise and walk to the chapel, lit only by a single flame in the sanctuary lamp. You kneel and ask, not for answers, but for endurance. You do not expect revelation, but you ask anyway. Is the truth divine because it is written? Or does it become divine because you declare it so? You wait in silence, but the only sound is the wind hissing through the cracks in the glass. You return to your chamber and draft your response. It is careful, ambiguous, wrapped in enough conditional phrasing to survive whatever future fire it might kindle. You sign your name. You press the seal. And as the wax cools, you feel the weight settle again in your chest. You are not the guardian of truth. You are its warden. And sometimes, it feels like the devil lives in the footnotes. The imperial envoy arrives at midday, flanked by a company of guards dressed more for ceremony than combat, their halberds gleaming in the Roman sun. Trumpets announce his presence, and pages scatter rose petals along the marble corridor as he approaches your audience chamber. He enters with a bow, ornate but not low, as if to remind you that while he respects the throne of Peter, he does not kneel easily. Behind him, a chest is wheeled in, a gift from the emperor, its contents unknown, but no doubt valuable. Gold, perhaps, or relics, or letters meant to seduce the memory of old alliances. You offer a measured smile and raise your hand in blessing. The envoy receives it with a nod, eyes never quite meeting yours. He presents the emperor's message with flourished language and subtle threats. The Holy Roman Emperor seeks your support in a territorial dispute. He assures you it is righteous, ordained, supported by scripture and by tradition. All it needs is your seal, your voice, a bull declaring divine sanction for a campaign already underway. You are to baptize conquest with authority. You do not reply immediately. Instead, you invite the envoy to refresh himself. You need time to think, though the outcome presses against your thoughts like iron on flesh. Once alone, you retreat to your study and open your predecessor's letters. They are full of these same entanglements, crowns demanding prayers, armies requesting blessings, emperors reminding popes of debts unpaid. The balance is delicate. To oppose the emperor risks fracture. To support him too readily invites accusations of subservience. The papacy claims to be the moral axis of Christendom, but the axis bends under the weight of politics. And right now, it bends toward the sword. You walk through the garden cloisters that afternoon, seeking clarity beneath the olive trees. A novice monk passing nearby looks up from his reading and bows. You envy him briefly. His questions are of angels and saints. Yours are of land and blood. You once believed you could bridge the world between church and empire, that your words could temper ambition. But now you see that ambition does not listen. It waits. It flatters. Then it demands. At Vespers, the chant echoes beneath the dome. You sit in your place, hands folded, eyes closed. But your mind is elsewhere, weighing choices. If you sign the decree, your authority deepens, but only as the emperor's servant. If you refuse, the empire may retaliate, subtly at first, perhaps more brutally later. You are caught in a net that has been spun for generations. That night, you draft a response that offers prayers but no permission. You choose the language of diplomacy over doctrine, a blessing without teeth. You pray the emperor will take the hint, or that he won't punish the church when he doesn't. As you press your seal into the wax, you know the truth. Popes wear crowns, but only so long as kings allow them to. And the line between emperor and vassal grows thinner with every passing year. The courier who brings the news is young, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion and dust crusting the hem of his cloak. He kneels before you in the antechamber without ceremony, as if burdened not by reverence, but by the weight of what he carries. You already know before he speaks. The letters have grown increasingly desperate over the past weeks, with each dispatch from the Levant darker than the last. Supplies had dwindled, morale had fractured, allies had vanished or betrayed. Still, you had hoped. Still, you had prayed. But today, those hopes are ground into dust. Jerusalem has fallen again. Not just a garrison or a citadel, but the whole city. Churches defiled, monks slaughtered, banners torn from towers and dragged through bloodied streets. The young man finishes his report with trembling lips and downcast eyes. You dismiss him with a blessing, though your voice falters as you raise your hand. Once he is gone, silence takes the room. Not the silence of peace, but the silence that follows a collapse. A terrible stillness. You rise from your chair and walk to the window. The sun still shines. The birds still sing. Rome goes on as if nothing has changed. But something has. Something foundational. For all the proclamations of divine destiny, for all the bulls and blessings, Jerusalem, the sacred heart of Christendom, slipped through your fingers like ash. You call a council that afternoon. Cardinals assemble in haste, wearing faces carved from stone. Some blame the commanders. Others whisper of betrayal among the Eastern allies. A few even dare to suggest divine punishment. Too many sins in Rome, too many indulgences, too much pride. The room teeters on the edge of hysteria masked by theology. You listen in silence, your hands resting on the arms of your chair as if to anchor you. When the voices subside, you do not speak of blame. You speak of mourning, of sorrow, of the need for unity in grief. The cardinals nod, but you see it in their eyes. This is more than loss. It is failure, and failure demands a cost. That evening, you retreat to the basilica alone. The great nave is empty, echoing, lit only by the flickering lamps near the altar. You kneel, not because it is expected, but because your legs refuse to hold you any longer. You whisper a prayer for the dead, for the pilgrims who will never return, for the friars dragged from sanctuaries in chains. You whisper a prayer for yourself, though it carries no certainty. You ask whether faith has failed, or whether faith was never meant to win. Later, you draft the encyclical to be read across Christendom. It will speak of sacrifice, of courage, of heavenly reward. It will urge the faithful to redouble their devotion, to prepare for redemption, not revenge. But your hands shake as you write. You know the truth too well. Jerusalem did not fall because the enemy was strong. It fell because the promises were too easy, the hope too fragile, and because no prayer ever laid mortar deep enough to hold a city's walls. The rains come without warning. Thunder rolls in from the hills, and the skies break open above Rome with a violence that rattles the palace windows in their frames. The servants rush to shutter them as wind drives water through the cracks, soaking tapestries and curling the edges of painted icons. Outside, the courtyards flood. Water spills down staircases like small rivers, washing over mosaic floors laid centuries ago by hands long forgotten. You watch from the high gallery, arms folded beneath your cloak, listening to the storm batter the very bones of your sanctuary. The palace is grand, yes, but it is also old. And now, as the ceiling groans and the plaster flakes from the walls, you are reminded that age does not always mean strength. A report is placed on your desk: water damage in the south wing, a collapsed ceiling near the scriptorium, crumbling mortar in the servants' quarters. The master builder requests funds for urgent repairs. You read the numbers. You know you do not have enough. The treasury has been strained for months, diverted toward crusade levies, indulgence campaigns, papal elections, and ceremonial pageantry. You had hoped to delay restoration until spring, but the palace will not wait. It is eroding from within. You walk the inner corridors later that evening with the keeper of the keys, a quiet man who knows every loose tile and warped beam in the palace. He shows you the cracks spidering along a load-bearing wall in the guest wing. He runs a gloved hand along a ceiling where water leaks in slow, steady drops. He does not speak in metaphor. He speaks in stone and weight, in rot and strain. But you feel the metaphor rising nonetheless. The palace is not just stone. It is the church. And it is groaning under centuries of accumulation, tradition stacked upon doctrine, wealth upon privilege, relics upon relics, until the foundation itself can no longer breathe. You pause in a narrow passage lined with statues of former popes, each one captured in stoic marble. You wonder how many of them faced storms like this, how many ignored the signs, trusting in ceremony to hold back collapse. You run your fingers along the edge of one weathered pedestal, feeling how time has worn away the face, the name, the legacy. Nothing lasts, not even here. Back in your chamber, you draft a letter to the Curia requesting funds be reallocated for emergency repairs. You know the resistance you'll face. Cardinals who believe aesthetics are secondary, others who believe the money would be better spent on pageants and diplomacy. You write anyway, because the stones are shifting, and you cannot afford to wait. That night, you lie in bed and listen to the drip, drip, drip of water beyond your walls. It is rhythmic, almost calming. But you know better. It is not music. It is warning. The palace cracks not because it is cursed or forgotten, but because nothing, no matter how gilded, can stand forever without care. And care, in this house, has become a luxury too rarely afforded. The messenger bows low, arms trembling, as he presents the parchment wrapped in blue ribbon. It is from the court of France, a reply to your recent bull. Not a warm one. The king is displeased with your judgment in a dispute between his favored abbey and a rival monastery under imperial protection. His language is courteous but thinly veiled with contempt. He refers to your ruling as unhelpful, your advisors as muddled, your authority as respected, yet remote. You roll the scroll tightly again and set it down with a slow breath. Another kingdom offended, another fire smoldering behind the walls of diplomacy. And tomorrow will bring another just like it. You are no longer surprised. The world watches every papal decision, not to be inspired, but to measure your weakness. In the outer chamber, your secretary enters with a stack of missives. Spain wants your blessing on a military campaign. England wants your silence on the imprisonment of a bishop. A duchy in the north seeks papal permission to mint coins bearing your image. You sit at your desk as he reads them aloud. Your eyes drift toward the window. The sun is rising over Rome, casting a golden line across the marble floor. You do not feel its warmth. You only feel the weight of the 1,000 eyes turned in your direction. Courts, cathedrals, provinces, priests. Everyone waiting for your next word, your next silence, your next mistake. Later that day, you walk through the outer courtyard, robes trailing behind you as pilgrims part in reverent hush. Some drop to their knees, others reach toward your sleeve. You bless them, yes, but your heart is far away. You see a child clutching a carved cross, her eyes wide with awe. Behind her, her father watches you warily. The world you serve is not the world she imagines. You are not Peter. You are not even yourself. You are a symbol now, one defined more by expectations than by faith, and symbols cannot rest. In the basilica, you attend a reading of your latest decree. The words are formal, deliberate. They concern the proper burial rites for soldiers slain on crusade, a matter chosen for its lack of controversy. Even here, even in the sanctuary, you find yourself crafting statements like a scribe carving runes into stone, clear enough to be understood, vague enough to be interpreted. You cannot afford boldness anymore. Only balance, only appearances. That evening, in your private study, you unfold the letter from France once more. You mark no response yet. You stare instead at the sentence that lingers in your mind. The world is watching. It is true. Not because it reveres you, but because it waits. To praise you when convenient, to damn you when useful. The world does not seek a pope. It seeks a mirror, one it can polish or shatter depending on its needs. You extinguish the candle. In darkness, you feel the gaze of nations pressing in. You close your eyes and ask, not for strength, but for invisibility. It is the one gift the papacy will never give. The wine is darker tonight. You notice it as soon as the servant pours it, thicker, almost syrupy, with a scent sharper than it should be. You nod, say nothing, and watch as he steps back into the shadows. He is new. You do not know his name. You lift the chalice slowly, eyes on the flickering candlelight, and pause. There is no evidence, no whisper, no letter slipped under your door, just a feeling, quiet, coiled in your gut, like something old and instinctive stirring beneath layers of silk and ceremony. You set the cup down without sipping, not out of panic, out of practice. You've heard the stories, every pope has, of chalices laced with powdered root, of inked parchments soaked in poison, of kisses on rings that burn the skin. Some of them are myths, some are not. Your predecessor died of fever, or so they said. You were there. You remember how quickly his breath vanished, how sudden the stillness. There was never an inquiry. The church does not investigate its own shadows. It simply blesses the corpse and begins again. You continue the meal, eating slowly, speaking calmly to the cardinal seated at your right. He is recounting a dispute in Saxony, but you only half hear him. Your attention remains on the wine, untouched, casting a red reflection across the silver plate. You wonder if anyone else notices. You wonder if someone is watching from the far end of the hall, waiting to see if your hands begin to tremble. Later, in your chamber, the cup is gone, removed by a servant whose face you did not see. You sit at your desk, your stomach tight with unease. It may have been nothing, paranoia, fatigue, or it may have been your only warning. That's the thing about power. It attracts silence. No assassin announces themselves in a cathedral. No betrayal wears a name. And yet, you must drink. You must eat. You must walk into rooms and accept blessings from men who might kill you if it moved the world a little more in their favor. You unfasten your stole and fold it with care, your fingers slow and deliberate. There's a letter waiting from the Chancellor of Naples requesting a papal envoy to mediate a border conflict. You will write the reply tomorrow. Tonight, you leave the parchment untouched. You blow out the candle. The room plunges into darkness. As you lie in bed, you think not of theology, nor politics, nor doctrine. You think of the cup, of how easy it would have been, a single sip, a fading breath, the sudden tilt of the world. You wonder, not for the first time, whether your life is measured now in sermons or in seconds spared by suspicion. And as you close your eyes, sleep does not come easily. Not because you fear death, but because you know it might arrive smiling, holding out a goblet, offering a drink in the name of peace. The stench rises before the sun does. Rot, filth, wine, sweat, and the slow breath of a city that never truly sleeps. You walk the loggia alone before morning prayers. The city sprawling beneath you like a sleeping beast, beautiful at a distance but foul when drawn too close. Rome, the eternal city, the seat of saints and emperors, the heart of the church. And yet every alley below brims with bribery, beggars, and blood. You know this not from maps, but from reports, from whispered confessions and scrolls smuggled under cloaks. There are places even cardinals fear to tread, places where your name is worth less than a purse of copper, and your blessing less than a loaf of bread. You hear it in council, soft remarks buried in budget discussions. A bishop wants more guards around a cathedral recently robbed. A deacon in Trastevere was found with his throat cut. A nun in Ostia vanished after speaking too openly about a local lord's donation to the monastery. And each time, the room responds with discomfort disguised as diplomacy. They say things like, an unfortunate incident, or a matter for the city guard. But no one truly investigates, because corruption is not a deviation here. It is the bloodstream. The clergy dine with merchants who sell relics of dubious origin. Cardinals accept bribes wrapped in velvet and call them gifts. You have seen too much to believe otherwise. You visit a monastery rumored to be harboring a brothel in its rear wing. The abbot meets you with a smile too wide and gestures too practiced. The building is immaculate, the choir rehearsed, the wine aged to perfection. But beneath it all, you feel it, that rot, polished and perfumed, but unmistakable. You ask a few pointed questions. You receive vague answers. Later, one of your aides receives an anonymous warning. The Holy Father sees too much. That night you sleep with a dagger beside the bed. Still, the pilgrims come. Thousands pour into Rome each year, eyes wide with devotion, hearts full of hope. They kneel before your blessing, weep at the sight of relics, scrape coins together for indulgences. They walk through the city thinking they are inside a living miracle. But you know the streets they walk are paved with fraud and washed with bribes. The miracles are carefully arranged. The holy men they meet are often more politician than prophet. You bless them anyway, because they need it, and because they have nothing else. You sit alone in your study that evening, Rome's night sky stretching black and starless beyond the window. You pour a small glass of wine and drink slowly, tasting the bitterness beneath the sweetness. Outside, a dog barks. Somewhere, a child cries. And down in the alleys, deals are struck in the name of saints who would have wept to hear their names used so. This city does not fear judgment. It has survived empire, fire, and famine. What it fears is light, not divine, but honest. And you, pope or not, cannot purge what has taken root so deeply. Rome endures, but so does its rot, and you rule from its heart. The petition arrives bound in white silk, carried by a priest with trembling hands and a face sunburnt from months on the road. He speaks of miracles, of divine visions, of a woman who healed the sick and fed the starving, who died in poverty with a prayer on her lips and the sign of the cross carved into her palm. A holy woman, he insists, a living saint. Her name already passes between lips like an ember of hope. Pilgrims leave coins at her grave, Her relics, he claims, have cured the blind and driven out demons. The faithful clamor for her canonization. All they need is your voice, your signature, your seal. You nod, thanking him, but say nothing. Once he leaves, you open the dossier. The testimonies are vivid, glowing, too vivid, too glowing. The accounts read like scripture, but scripture written to sell something. You flip through pages praising her virtues in exacting symmetry, her visions conveniently timed with major liturgical feasts. One testimony mentions a noble son healed of madness after touching her robe. You remember that noble. He is a known patron of the monastery that submitted the petition. That makes things complicated. Later, you walk through the archives, past cabinets stuffed with the lives of saints, real, legendary, aspirational. You read their names. Some were martyred in agony. Some died unknown and were only raised centuries later. A few, like this woman, had their stories cultivated while their bones were still warm. You know what's happening. You've seen it before. Canonization brings pilgrims. Pilgrims bring coin. A declared saint turns an obscure chapel into a destination, a dying monastery into a thriving enterprise. Holiness is real, but in Rome, even sanctity must be accounted for in ledgers. You return to your chamber and call for your advisors. The theologians debate her merits. The cardinals debate her politics. One bishop objects, claiming her visions border on heresy. Another insists canonization is urgent, that the church must answer the people's devotion. No one mentions money, yet it hangs in the air heavier than incense. You sit in silence, staring at your ring as their voices wash over you. Eventually, you send them away. That night, you visit the basilica and kneel in a side chapel where the flickering votives blur the faces of carved angels. You whisper a prayer, not for guidance, but for clarity. Should sainthood be a reward for virtue or a weapon of influence? If this woman truly brought peace and comfort, does it matter whether her miracles were real? Or is that the very question you were chosen to protect? In the morning, you begin drafting the proclamation. You do not confirm sainthood, not yet. You authorize further inquiry, a delay, a message. Let the monks know that God may act swiftly, but Rome does not. You press your seal into the wax and feel the weight of it settle again in your chest. You once believed sainthood was a crown of light. Now you see it for what it is, a chain. Golden, heavy, forged of hope and suspicion. And once conferred, it binds the church to a story it cannot rewrite. The reports arrive from distant coasts, carried in salt-stained satchels by sunburnt priests with blistered hands. They speak of strange gods, wooden idols, bloodless rituals, and peoples who wear no crosses but build shrines to the wind and sea. In these new lands, uncharted and wide as Scripture's silences, the boundaries of the church dissolve into ambiguity. The missionaries ask for guidance. Some beg for resources. Others plead for patience. A few suggest adapting doctrine to local customs to bridge the gap between the gospel and the gods already worshipped there. They frame it carefully, cloaked in appeals to mercy and pastoral care. But you know what they are truly asking. How much can the church bend before it breaks? You remember the council that debated such matters decades ago, when you were still a young canon with ink-stained fingers and too many opinions. The conclusion then was firm: Christ alone. All other paths are shadows. But that was theory. This is now. And now, those shadows are full of people, children, elders, entire villages, whose lives move with a rhythm alien to Rome's bells. You read of a chieftain who listens respectfully to sermons, but still anoints his dead with ash and song. Another letter recounts a healing that took place after a priest allowed local herbs to be used alongside holy oil. Miracles, superstition, heresy, the boundaries begin to blur. In the Curia, opinions divide. Some cardinals speak of fire and cleansing. They quote Leviticus and lament the softness of modern missionaries. Others urge caution. They speak of conversion by patience, not by force, of shaping the church to fit the world without dissolving it. You sit silent as they debate, fingers steepled beneath your chin. You hear their fears, fear of dilution, of scandal, of paganism masquerading as progress. But what you fear is deeper. What if the church is no longer the sun, but a star among many? What if the people in these lands do not see your missionaries as saviors, but as invaders wrapped in linen and scripture? That evening, you walk alone through the Vatican garden. The fig trees are heavy with fruit, the air thick with summer. You pass a statue of St. Paul, sword in hand, gaze forever turned outward. You wonder what he would have said, this man who once bridged the gap between Jew and Gentile, who walked into temples and debated philosophers. He would have walked into those distant villages. He would have spoken. He would have risked being wrong. You return to your desk and write not a condemnation, but a caution. Continue the mission, you say, but do not yet baptize their gods. Do not yet rename their spirits. Learn first. Listen, then speak. You seal the letter, knowing it will satisfy no one completely. That is the cost of leadership in a world too large for doctrine to hold all at once. You sit back in your chair, staring at the map spread before you, oceans without names, islands inked only in speculation. The pagan question is not about others, it is about you. How far are you willing to follow faith into the unknown? And when you arrive, will you recognize the truth if it is not wearing your vestments? You begin to notice it first in the way conversations stop when you enter a room, the way servants bow too quickly, their eyes fixed a little too low, the way a door you never ordered shut is always closed now, and the guards at the chapel linger just a moment longer when your prayers end. The palace hasn't changed, but its silence has. It's thicker now, coated with watchfulness, with implication. You sit at your writing desk and feel the gaze of eyes you cannot see. Not enemies, not yet, but not friends either. Information flows strangely through these halls. Letters you sent in confidence are replied to by men you never addressed. Private audiences you scheduled somehow reach ears outside your inner circle. And then there's the matter of your confessor, still soft-spoken, still warm, but no longer predictable. He references thoughts you never said aloud to him. Or did you? You begin to second-guess your own memory. Did you mention that bishop scandal during confession? Or only to your secretary? You try to piece it together in your mind, but the strands are knotted now. Someone is keeping a ledger you were never allowed to see. One night, you enter the library long after midnight, hoping for solitude among the codices and candle smoke. There you find a young cleric, someone from the chancery, copying correspondence by lamplight. You ask what he's working on. He jumps. He stammers. He says something about archival redundancy. You smile, thank him, and leave. But the paper he was holding bore your private seal, and you never authorized a copy. You summon your closest advisor the next day, a cardinal you have known since before your elevation. You speak plainly, asking how far your words travel once they leave your mouth. He does not lie. He tells you what you already know. There are ears in every room. There are hands that sort your letters before you ever see them. There are watchers who report to those who believe they serve the greater good, even when the greater good must come at your expense. It's not personal, he says. It's protection. It's continuity. You thank him, you dismiss him, and you do not sleep that night. You begin changing the way you speak. You offer half-truths in public chambers, save your honesty for walks alone in the gardens. You write letters and never send them. You test your own court with silence, with contradiction, with delay. You watch who reacts. You mark who waits. You pray for clarity. And still, the whispers grow. The Vatican is made of stone, but stone remembers everything. It holds secrets in its cold, porous skin. It listens better than men do, and it never forgets. You once thought the greatest danger to a pope came from outside these walls, from heretics, from kings, from war. Now you know the truth. The most dangerous threats are the ones who call you Holy Father to your face and report every word you say the moment the door closes behind you. The procession begins at midday under a sky as white and pitiless as parchment. You are borne through the streets of Rome atop a gilded chair, surrounded by chants and clouds of incense, your figure draped in fine linen and your hands raised in slow, measured blessing. The people press in from every side, pilgrims weeping with joy, merchants holding out infants to be kissed, beggars mouthing silent prayers. It is a river of devotion, a tide of bodies surging toward the image of holiness, toward you. But as your chair glides forward on the shoulders of loyal men, something begins to settle in your chest, a quiet, sharp discomfort. You feel less like a man and more like an object. You pass beneath towering arches, past fountains and shrines, as musicians play hymns that you barely hear. The din of the city fades to a dull, distant thrum. In its place rises a different sound, a silence within yourself, shaped like doubt. You look out over the crowd and see faces not lifted in love, but in awe, or expectation, or need. They don't see your thoughts. They don't hear your prayers. They see the robe, the ring, the tiara. They see the vicar of Christ. Not you, not the man beneath it. At the basilica steps, you are lifted from your chair and walked inside on foot, as tradition demands. The doors swing open with ancient solemnity. The marble floor gleams. The choir begins again. But it feels performative, hollow. The sanctuary is full, yet your heart is distant. As you approach the altar to give your blessing, you catch your reflection in the polished silver of a candelabrum. You pause. For just a moment, you do not recognize the man reflected there. His face is calm, stern, almost carved. His eyes are tired but unreadable. He looks like a statue. After the ceremony, you are led to a reception hall where nobles and cardinals wait to kiss your ring and offer shallow congratulations. The conversation is polite, filled with the familiar exchanges of obligation. A duchess mentions her late husband's faith. A knight offers a token from a recent pilgrimage. A merchant presents a gift, an ivory reliquary said to contain a sliver of the true cross. You accept it, smile faintly, and nod. Inside, your thoughts drift. When did you become just another relic? That night, back in your chambers, you remove the vestments piece by piece. Each garment folds with a whisper, like old parchment being turned. The tiara rests on its velvet stand. The ring, heavy and cold, is placed beside it. You wash your face in silence. You look into the mirror and see the man return slowly, feature by feature, as the robes are peeled away. He looks older than you remember. You lie down without prayer, not because you lack faith, but because you fear that even God, by now, may only see the robes. You once believed that to rule as pope meant to guide the church like a shepherd. Now you wonder if you've become something else entirely, lifted, carried, displayed, not to lead, but to be seen, not a ruler, a symbol, a relic, embalmed while still breathing. The parchment is old, brittle at the edges, sealed in a cracked red wax that bears the insignia of a pope long buried beneath marble and memory. It arrives unannounced, discovered in the recesses of the Vatican archives by a scribe chasing footnotes in a forgotten volume. He brings it to you carefully, as if the air might tear it apart. The handwriting is angular, dark with age, and unmistakably papal. You hold it with reverence, but also with a strange apprehension. You are reading a message not from a predecessor, but from a man who once bore the same burden, walked the same halls, and wore the same crown. His voice reaches across time, inked in a moment of despair. The letter is not addressed to a name, but to an office, to the one who follows me. It is not a public bull, not a doctrinal letter meant for the church. It is personal, painfully so. He writes of loneliness, of betrayals too subtle to name and fears too dangerous to admit. He speaks of the strain of smiling while weighed down with secrets, of the temptation to abdicate, not out of weakness, but out of a desperate wish for peace. He writes of a vision he once had, a dream in which Christ turned his face away from the Lateran throne, weeping not out of sorrow, but exhaustion. You finish reading it in silence. No date is given, no final blessing. Just the signature, his papal name followed by a single Latin phrase scrawled in haste. Et ego solus sum. And I am alone. You stare at that phrase until the candle beside you gutters out. The room dims. The shadows return to their corners. You roll the letter back into its tube and hold it for a long time in your lap. The silence around you deepens, not just the quiet of night, but the kind that presses in, that listens. The kind that makes you wonder how many others came before you with the same ache in their chests and the same need to tell someone, anyone, what this office really does to a soul. The next morning you summon your archivist and ask if more letters like this exist. He hesitates, then nods. Yes, some are cataloged, some are not. Some were never meant to be found. You ask to see them. Over the next weeks, they come by the dozen. Scrolls, missives, fragments of parchment with trembling Latin lines and cramped marginal notes. All written by men who once sat in your place. Men who bore the ring and bled in silence. They do not give answers. They give warnings, echoes, confessions that never saw daylight until now. You begin keeping a letter of your own, hidden, unsigned, not for historians, not for the church, for the next pope, for the one who will sit in this same room, hold this same pen, and wonder, as you do now, if anyone ever truly understands what it means to wear the tiara and whisper prayers into walls that never answer back. They arrive by the hundreds, sometimes thousands, in dusty caravans and on blistered feet, eyes wide with the ache of longing. Pilgrims, the lifeblood of Rome, the song of Christendom in human form. They come with coins sewn into hems, relics clasped to chests, parchments bearing prayers too precious to speak aloud. They sleep in alleys, chant in chapels, weep beneath frescoes, and they all come for you, or rather, for the idea of you, the Holy Father, the Vicar of Christ, the anchor in the shifting sea of their souls. You are the destination of their journey. But you know the truth. You are also the end of their illusion. You observe them from a lattice window in the Lateran palace where the sun glints off helmets and halos alike. Children lifted onto shoulders, blind men led by trembling hands, women clutching rosaries until their palms bleed. They do not see the city for what it is. They see what they've been told to see. A beacon, a miracle. You watch one man kneel in the filth outside the basilica, pressing his lips to the stone and crying aloud that his cancer will be healed. You whisper a prayer for him. You do not believe it will be answered. During Mass, they flood the cathedral's interior, the air thick with incense and sweat. Your homily is translated into half a dozen tongues. You speak of hope, of faith, of the eternal city. You speak with warmth. You speak with certainty. You do not speak of politics or coin or the mendicant friar outside who will not live through winter. When you raise the host and bless the crowd, you feel 100 gazes pierce your vestments, desperate for absolution. But you also hear murmurs, arguments about indulgence prices, bickering between vendors, a priest grumbling about fake relics flooding the streets. Faith, it seems, travels with parasites. In private, your chamberlain shows you the ledgers. Pilgrims bought more indulgences this month than the last. The relic trade has grown by 40%. Donations to the basilica are up, despite poor harvests across half of Europe. You nod without comment. Rome eats hunger and hope alike, chewing through desperation with holy teeth. You wonder, not for the first time, whether the walls of this city are held together by prayers or profit. One evening, disguised in plain robes, you walk among the pilgrims. No guards, no fanfare. Just another cleric lost in the crowd. You hear their stories, their wounds, their dreams. You help a child find her mother. You light a candle for a man who cannot afford the tithe. No one recognizes you. It is the freest you've felt in years. But you also see the sellers hawking bone splinters and oil-soaked rags, claiming they once touched a saint's grave. You watch a beggar be beaten for asking too loudly. And when you kneel beside him to offer a coin, he spits at you, mistaking you for another fraud. That night, you lie in bed and stare at the ceiling. The pilgrims came to see a miracle. They left with souvenirs. You wonder if you too have become a souvenir, blessed, gold-framed, hollow. And you fear the day one of them asks for more than the illusion, because then you will have nothing left to offer. In the heart of the palace lies a room few ever enter. No frescoes adorn its walls. No tapestries soften its stone. It is windowless, lit only by a few oil lamps and the flicker of candlelight. Here, beneath the grandeur of the papal chambers, beneath the marble altars and Latin chants, another crown is kept, one not forged of gold or gems, but of parchment, debt, and diplomacy. You descend to it now, not as a holy man, but as a manager, a negotiator, a ruler of accounts and alliances. Because no matter how often you kneel in prayer, Rome's survival is rooted not in the heavens, but in what is signed, sealed, and paid. The crown above your head is heavy, but this one presses differently. It's the pressure of promise, of favors owed, and expectations deferred. You sit at a table surrounded by advisors, each with their own scrolls, maps, and ledgers. The papal treasurer lays out the reality. War in the east drains tithes faster than they come. A basilica roof collapses in a distant province. Repairs must be funded. An influential duke threatens to pull support unless a cardinal favorable to his cause is appointed. Each item is laid before you like an altar of necessity, and your approval is the sacrifice. Every decision you make weighs not just on the soul, but on the solvency of the church. One bishop proposes a new crusade indulgence, a tax really, disguised as a spiritual grace. It would bring in thousands of florins, but at what cost? Another suggests selling a portion of church land to the Medici bankers to cover the debts from the previous conclave. A third recommends quietly increasing the price of absolutions for nobles. They speak as though these things are mundane, routine, because to them, they are. To you, they are knives dressed as quills. You do not respond right away. Instead, you excuse yourself, retreating into a small alcove lined with relics that once belonged to popes past. A ring, a crozier, a blood-stained robe. You stare at them and wonder if their burdens ever felt like this. You once believed that to lead meant lifting others. Now you see that to lead often means weighing which burdens to pass along and which to hide. You return to the room and begin your replies. No to the land sale. Yes to the indulgence, but with caveats to ensure the poor are exempt. Approve the cathedral fund, but delay other building projects by a year. You speak with finality, but feel no resolution. You are not solving. You are buying time. And time, here in Rome, is always on loan. As the meeting ends, you are left alone with the balance sheets. The candle flickers. You write a note to yourself, folded and sealed, tucked into the pocket of your robe. It reads, "Remember, there are 2 crowns. One they see, one you bear." And sometimes you think the second is the heavier of the 2, because it cannot be removed, because it grows tighter with every promise made in the name of God, but paid in the coin of compromise. The relic is laid before you on a velvet cushion, brought in with reverent hands and anxious eyes. They say it's the bone of a martyr, Saint Aurelius, whose name echoes faintly through the catacombs of church history. The bishop who delivered it insists on its authenticity. He recounts visions, miracles, and a recent healing that occurred when a crippled child touched the reliquary. Pilgrims now flock to the remote chapel where it was found, singing praises and leaving coins in its honor. He asks, gently but firmly, that you canonize the site, declare it sacred, fund its expansion. Your name, your blessing, would make the legend eternal. You lift the relic, hold it to the light. It is a finger bone, wrapped in fine gold wire, mounted in a case of carved wood. You've seen 100 such fragments. You've blessed dozens. But this one feels no different than the rest. No warmth, no holy whisper, no sudden sense of the divine. Just silence. Yet if you deny it, you risk offending a province already frayed by theological disputes. If you approve it, you risk adding another fiction to a library already overflowing with pious exaggeration. Saints do not speak, but their silence can be deafening. The College of Cardinals weighs in, of course. Some press you to embrace the miracle. Rome needs inspiration, especially in these dark times. Others scoff, calling it a local stunt, a scheme for money and attention. They argue over protocol, over doctrine, over whether faith is harmed more by credulity or by cynicism. You listen, you nod, you say little, because beneath their voices is a deeper truth. Miracles, in this age, are expected to serve purposes. They are currency, they are proof, and without them, the faithful grow restless. At night, you kneel in the papal oratory and place the relic before the altar. You pray for a sign, a dream, a whisper, anything. The stone floor presses cold against your knees. Your breath fogs in the stillness, but nothing stirs. You remain there for hours, unmoving, until the candles burn low and the relic's gold filigree glows dully in the gloom. You close your eyes and ask the question you dare not voice in public. What if the saints have nothing left to say? Eventually, you rise and return the relic to its box. The next morning, you sign the document that declares the chapel a place of holy interest, but not yet a shrine. You authorize an investigation, a delay, a way to neither condemn nor endorse. It is a compromise dressed as prudence. The bishop is disappointed, but polite. The cardinals murmur, but nod. The pilgrims, of course, continue to come, because belief does not wait for bureaucracy. You watch them from your balcony days later, kneeling, singing, placing coins beside the reliquary. And you feel it again, that subtle ache, the weight of being both shepherd and skeptic. You long for the age when miracles came unbidden, when saints walked among the faithful, when a bone was not just a symbol but a presence. But you live in an age of silence. And so you lead them quietly through the stillness, hoping that faith, even without a voice, might still light the way. It begins with a cough, a dry rasp in your throat that does not leave, even after water, even after wine. Then come the nights of sweat, the tremble in your hands as you sign the day's briefs, the heaviness in your limbs that prayer does not lift. The physicians are summoned. They enter with soft voices and soft feet, bearing herbs and apologies. They do not tell you what you already know. Your body is failing, not yet enough to be bedridden, but enough that the walls of the palace feel suddenly closer, the air thicker, the crown heavier. You sit in your private study, breathing through parchment and incense, and you feel it, the weight of time shifting against your spine. The palace does not slow. If anything, it accelerates. The curia moves with greater urgency, sensing something unspoken. Your chamberlain checks on you more often. The guards stand straighter. The cardinals arrive earlier, linger longer. They have heard rumors. They watch your color, your stride, your pauses in conversation. You see it in their eyes, the calculation, the silent math of succession. Already, the throne waits, not with eagerness, but with inevitability. The throne waits, always. You attempt to continue as before. Mass in the morning, meetings by midday, decisions on discipline, disputes, and dioceses. You write a letter to the King of France, carefully avoiding the tremor in your hand. You review reports from the Holy Land, ignoring the sharp pain that rises when you reach across your desk. You receive an envoy from Constantinople and bless him in Latin, Greek, and silence. But each day, the hours become harder to fill. The sunlight feels more distant through the stained glass. The songs of the choir echo longer. You begin to measure time, not by the bells, but by what your body can no longer endure. At night, you walk the halls when no one sees. Past tapestries that depict earlier popes, triumphant in war, serene in council, radiant in martyrdom. You stop before each one and whisper their names. You wonder if they too feared the end, or if death, for them, was simply a closing hymn. In the chapel, you kneel until your legs fail beneath you, asking for clarity. Not deliverance, not healing, just clarity. A sign that the years you spent wielding power in God's name were not merely acts of survival. That the weight you bore meant something beyond policy and parchment. One evening, the physician returns, more solemn than before. He mentions the word decline in passing, like a note struck off key. You nod. You knew already. What matters now is not the ending, but how you greet it. You draft a final instruction to the College of Cardinals, not a command, but a hope, that the next shepherd will choose mercy over pride and silence over thunder. You seal it in wax and place it in the drawer of your desk. Then you return to the chapel and light a single candle. You watch the flame dance, small and stubborn, and you breathe with it. The next day you rise slowly, dress with care, and step once more into the courtyard of St. Peter's. The sun is pale, the crowd is thin, but you lift your hand in blessing. Your voice, though soft, carries. And for a moment, as the wind catches your robes and lifts the scent of myrrh into the sky, you feel neither sick nor strong, but simply present. The throne waits, but so too does peace. The door to the private chapel shuts with a gentle thud, sealing out the hum of voices, the rustle of documents, and the distant toll of the cathedral bells. In here, there is only candlelight and stillness, and a man in a plain robe who waits for you not as a servant, not as an advisor, but as a vessel for truth, your confessor. He sits quietly on the wooden bench, hands folded, head bowed in patient reverence. He is the only soul in all of Rome permitted to hear the burdens you carry not in statecraft, but in spirit. And tonight, you bring him more than the usual sins of silence and omission. You kneel, not out of formality, but because it is the only position in which you can speak without breaking. The velvet of your robes gathers around your knees, pooling like spilled ink across the floor. You begin not with a sin, but with a question. Have I led them astray? The whisper escapes before you can gather it. The weight of the papacy does not rest on doctrine alone. It rests on every decision you made in private, every compromise, every silence, every word you allowed to pass as truth when you yourself were unsure. The confessor listens without interruption. He does not ask for specifics. He knows better. You speak of indulgences signed because the coffers were empty, of bishops appointed not for holiness, but for loyalty, of letters you sent to distant monarchs to pacify them, flatter them, avoid another war. You speak of moments when you felt the Holy Spirit in the room, and others when you felt only yourself. You speak of fear, of ambition, of pride masquerading as divine duty. You speak of days you wished you were still a simple monk, copying scripture in a cold monastery rather than a sovereign weighed down by gold and guilt. When you fall silent, the confessor remains so for a long moment. Then gently he asks you the one question that matters. Do you seek forgiveness? You do. Not for failing to be perfect, but for forgetting, at times, why you were chosen in the first place, for letting power become a habit, for allowing the office to become a shield instead of a mirror. You want to remember the voice you once heard when you were first anointed, that quiet certainty that whispered, "Serve, not rule." The confessor offers absolution in words older than empire. You close your eyes and let them wash over you. But absolution, you know, is not the same as peace. It is only the beginning of the walk back toward it. You rise, slower than you once did, and thank him. As you open the chapel door, you see the shadows of the palace stretch long across the stone, like the fingers of the past still reaching for you. Outside, another meeting waits, another decision, another soul whose path depends on the stroke of your quill. But in this small hour, in this quiet room, you remembered what the crown is supposed to mean. Not authority, but stewardship. Not perfection, but humility. You walk back into the fire, absolved, but not unchanged. Because confession, for a pope, is not about being clean. It is about remembering you are human. It begins before dawn, as it always does. You wake not to sunlight or bird song, but to the soft knock of your chamberlain and the whisper of incense already drifting through the air. Today is the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, a high holy day, a spectacle. And you, Vicar of Christ, Bishop of Rome, are both centerpiece and prisoner. The vestments have been laid out. Gold-embroidered alb, stole, chasuble, gloves, slippers, the triple crown polished until it catches every flicker of candlelight. You are dressed not like a man, but like an icon. You are made to shimmer like holiness itself, even as your body aches beneath the fabric. Servants prepare you in silence, adjusting each layer with practiced care. The mitre is placed upon your head, briefly, before the tiara replaces it with greater weight. The ceremonial crozier is placed in your hand. Your fingers tighten around it, not out of comfort, but for balance. Outside, the basilica bells begin their cascade. You hear them echo through the city, calling the faithful to witness your sanctity. But you know what truly awaits is not prayer, but performance. You process through the Lateran halls as hundreds fall to their knees. The Swiss Guard raises halberds in salute. Cardinals and bishops chant in perfect harmony. You descend the marble steps with practiced solemnity, each step measured, choreographed, a slow ballet of reverence. The people gathered in the square cheer and cross themselves. Some weep at the sight of you. Others reach out with hands trembling, hoping for the briefest brush of your blessing. To them, you are not a man. You are a vessel of the divine. But you feel the sweat trickling under your collar and the fatigue blooming in your joints. You know what they do not, that even a holy procession can feel like a march to penance. Inside the basilica, the liturgy begins. You recite prayers memorized long ago, each syllable reverberating against gold leaf arches and painted ceilings. You perform the sacrament with practiced grace, lifting the chalice with arms grown heavier each year. You know the camerae obscura hidden in the loft are capturing this moment for reproduction, painting, history. The image of the serene pope will be passed down for generations. But the man behind the crown? He is counting the minutes. When the final hymn fades and the incense coils upward like smoke from a dying candle, you return to the palace on aching feet. You remove each layer of vestment slowly with the help of servants. The golden robe falls away, then the jeweled gloves. You are left once more in simple linen, your skin marked by the seams of ceremony. You sit in the quiet of your study, stare at your bare hands, and feel the ghost of the crown still pressing on your brow. Ceremony, you have learned, is its own kind of chain. It binds not with iron, but with expectation. You must embody certainty even when you feel lost. You must radiate peace even when your thoughts scream. Today, you were holy for the world. But tomorrow, when the robes are folded away and the incense has cleared, you will again be something more vulnerable. A man in a chair that is never truly empty. A servant dressed as a sovereign, bound by ritual and the eternal pageantry of faith. There is a room beneath the Vatican that most do not know exists. It is not marked by grandeur or marble, but by silence and secrecy. Here, beneath the high altars and the sweeping frescoes, lies a chamber built of thick stone and older purpose. Once, it was a repository for relics, then a vault for apostolic archives. Now, it holds whispers on parchment, sealed letters that have never seen the light of day. This is where the papal secretariat stores the correspondence deemed too volatile, too sensitive, or too dangerous for open record. And today, you descend into it with only a single lantern and the master archivist at your side. The door closes behind you, muffling the sound of Rome. You move past shelves of rolled scrolls and iron-bound ledgers, their dates long faded into dust. The archivist shows you a drawer wrapped in red silk cord, the mark of pontifical privilege. Inside it are 3 letters, written decades apart but joined by a thread of dread. They are from kings, bishops, and a pope who died under suspicious circumstances. Each one speaks not of faith or doctrine, but of betrayal, espionage, and unspoken threats made in the name of righteousness. You sit on a wooden bench and read them in silence. The first warns of a cardinal secretly corresponding with a foreign crown. The second reports a murdered envoy whose last confession implicated a papal secretary. The third is the hardest to read. It is written in a hand that trembles across the page. It is a pope begging his successor not to trust the inner circle, not without scrutiny, not without fear. You trace the final line with your finger. They smiled as they lit the fire. You close the letter slowly. For a long time, neither you nor the archivist speak. It is a strange truth that the holiest place in Christendom has always cast long shadows. The deeper you walk into power, the more you realize how many foundations are built upon withheld truths. You had hoped that confession, prayer, and tradition would be the bedrock of your role, but beneath the marble and pageantry lies something older, colder, more enduring: secrecy. Rome does not run on purity. It runs on what is not said aloud. You return to your chambers that evening and light a single candle. You stare at the flame and try to remember what brought you here. It wasn't ambition, not entirely. It was belief. Belief that you could serve, that you could lead with clarity. But now you understand that leadership means silence as often as speech. That there are truths you cannot share. Letters you must never answer. Names you must never utter in public, though they burn behind your eyes. You place the letters in a sealed chest beneath your writing desk. You lock it. You do not destroy them. They must remain. They are a warning, not only to you, but to those who will follow. The flame of faith burns high in the basilica above, but here, in the stillness below, the whisper of caution lingers. And you, the shepherd of millions, must carry both, the light and the shadow. The great hall fills with crimson and gold. Cardinals in layered vestments take their seats in a semicircle, their expressions composed, their gestures precise. Scrolls rustle, inkpots clink, and a faint murmur carries across the vaulted chamber like the buzzing of distant bees. Today is a council meeting, one of many, and though the agenda is long, most matters will not find resolution. Councils under your reign have become less places of decision and more places of delay, of performance, of carefully choreographed debate that circles the truth without landing upon it. Still, you sit at the head of the chamber, raised slightly above the others, the shepherd presiding over a flock that bleats in Latin. Each cardinal brings a concern, a province whose churches lie in ruin after a storm, a bishop who refuses to enforce a papal bull, a priest accused of heresy whose following grows by the month. One after another they stand, speak, bow, and sit. Their words are barbed with caution, their accusations veiled in appeals to scripture and tradition. No one names enemies directly. That would break the etiquette of holy politics. But you hear the edge in every syllable. You see the calculations behind every nod. Your role is not to decide. Not yet. Your role is to listen, to weigh, to maintain the illusion that all voices are equal, even as some carry far more weight than others. You offer calm replies, references to canon law, promises of further deliberation. It is a performance you know well, and it wears you down more than any procession, any fast, any confession. Because in this room, change is a threat, and every truth must pass through layers of approval before it is allowed to breathe. At one point, a younger cardinal speaks out of turn. He challenges an elder on the matter of simony, pointing to specific abuses in a northern archdiocese. The hall freezes, eyes narrow. The elder smiles without warmth and quotes a counsel from a century past. The matter is tabled. The younger cardinal looks down at his shoes. You say nothing. Not because you agree with the elder, but because you know that protecting the dignity of the council is part of protecting the church, even when it costs justice, even when it stifles reform. By mid-afternoon, the room has grown warm with breath and candle heat. Sweat stains the collars of even the most composed prelates. The voices dull into repetition. Proposals are repeated, rephrased, redirected. Eventually, you call for adjournment. The room rises, bows, and slowly empties, each cardinal careful to leave in a particular order, eyes avoiding certain others. You remain behind, gazing at the empty seats. This is what it means to rule by consensus. Not unity, but a delicate balance of tension. Progress measured in inches. Decisions deferred in the name of divine caution. You once believed councils were sacred assemblies of wisdom. Now you understand they are chessboards, slow-moving, patient, and ruthless. And you are not the king on this board. You are the table it's played upon. Long before any sword is drawn, before any treaty ink dries, before the cries of soldiers or the tolling of bells, war begins with words. It begins with requests, then demands, then veiled threats. Today, on your desk, lies a letter from a monarch whose seal is cracked, but whose meaning is clear. He wishes for papal sanction in a campaign against a neighboring king. He cites heresy, claims betrayal, invokes God's justice. But you know better. You see through the thorns of Scripture and find the stem of ambition. And so begins another invisible war, not on the battlefield, but within these very walls. You send for your chancellor and your military cleric. They arrive with parchment and precedent. They show you prior bulls and rulings, quote Gregory and Innocent, cite every example of when the church supported a just war and when it did not. You nod, you listen, but you are not seeking answers. You are measuring risk. Endorsing a king makes you complicit in his victory and his failure. Refusing him makes you his enemy. Neutrality buys time, but not peace. A second letter arrives 2 days later, this one from the other monarch, equally pious in tone, equally desperate beneath it. He claims innocence. He begs your intervention to halt bloodshed. He appeals to your conscience, to the unity of Christendom. You recognize the manipulation in every flourish. You know how these men use faith like a shield, how they invoke your name to sanctify ambition, how they place your authority on their banners and march beneath it without shame. You remember the faces of peasants who will suffer for these decisions, faces that never appear in royal letters. That evening, in the candlelit stillness of your study, you draft a reply that says nothing and everything. You urge peace. You condemn violence. You ask for prayer and dialogue. You do not choose a side. But your words are chosen with surgical care, each one weighed for how it will be twisted, how it will be read in courts and councils across Europe. Because you know that in war, the Pope's role is both shield and sword. Your silence can speak louder than your voice. Your delay can determine the tide of kingdoms. Later, you retreat to the Vatican's inner garden, where the olive trees grow. You walk among their shadows and remember the stories of Peter and Paul, men who died for truth, not strategy. You wonder what they would say of your role. Would they see you as protector of the church, or a participant in games of thrones and power masked in ritual? As stars appear overhead, you feel the tension settle deeper into your bones. This war may never see your face. Your hands may never touch a weapon, but your name, your title, your seal, those will march alongside every army that rises. You are the Pope, and even when your robes are clean, your shadow walks the battlefields. There's a certain hour in the Vatican when even the marble seems to breathe. After the last candle has guttered in the chapel, after the secretaries have gone to their quarters, and after the couriers have stopped their pacing footsteps in the halls, a profound silence descends. It's not the silence of peace, it's the silence of weight, of questions that remain unspoken, decisions not yet made, and the eerie stillness of a palace that never truly sleeps. You sit alone in your private chamber, still robed though the hour is long past vespers, your hands folded but restless. The room is dim, lit only by the embers of a brazier and the faint silver light slipping through the narrow window. In your lap is a letter you haven't opened. You've read dozens today, appeals from bishops, threats from kings, petitions for sainthood, reports of rebellion. But this one bears no seal, no mark. It was slipped under your door during supper. You trace the edges of the parchment, wondering whether it holds truth or poison. The line between the two is ever thinner these days. When you finally break the fold and read, it is neither. It's a confession from an anonymous priest. A plea for absolution, not for a sin committed, but for a silence kept. He speaks of injustice he witnessed in a local tribunal, a bishop who condemned a woman for heresy out of revenge, not evidence. He writes of fear, of the cost of speaking out, of his soul curling inward each day he remains complicit. You finish reading, and for a long time, you do nothing. You think about the countless silences that echo within these walls, the scandals unspoken, the alliances formed in quiet corners, the truths too dangerous to ever see the altar. You think of your own silences, when you allowed certain voices to be louder than others, when you turned away from suffering because it would have cost you favor. You wonder if silence is the most common sin in this place. Not lies, not cruelty, but the quiet that allows them to thrive. You rise and walk barefoot across the cold floor, each step a whisper against the stone. You make your way to the inner chapel. It's empty, as expected. You do not light a candle. You kneel in the dark, not to ask for guidance, but to listen. Not to God's voice, but to the silence that fills the chamber like smoke. You breathe in and out, and it feels like penance. You know you cannot undo the decisions of the day, but perhaps you can acknowledge them, name them, instead of letting them rot beneath robes and incense. When you return to your chamber, the letter still lies open on the chair. You fold it gently, press it between the pages of your psalter, and write a note to summon the cardinal in charge of inquisitorial reviews. Tomorrow, you will act, not publicly, but decisively, because some silences, when left to linger, become louder than sermons. And in this hour after midnight, you finally hear them. By morning, the petition is already waiting on your desk, bound in silk ribbon and signed by hundreds, nobles, clergy, abbots, and even the queen of a distant realm. They are asking for canonization. A young monk, recently martyred, said to have performed miracles even after death. The petition paints him as a second Francis, a light in the darkness, a vessel of God's grace. His grave, they say, has become a site of pilgrimage. His bones are kissed, his robe torn into relics. Cures are whispered. Children have spoken. Rain has fallen after years of drought. The people are ready to believe, and they want you to make it real. You summon your advisors, doctrinal officers, bishops versed in hagiography, and one old cardinal who remembers the last canonization and the controversy it stirred. The room fills with murmured Latin, parchment unrolled, testimonies read aloud. They discuss the monk's life, his charity, his suffering, his death by brigands on a forest road. You hear phrases like cultus popularis and evidence of intercession. But beneath it all, you sense the politics. The Queen supports this cause, and her kingdom sends generous tithes. The abbey where the monk lived hopes to raise funds through relic sales. A canonized saint brings pilgrims, and pilgrims bring coin. You excuse the gathering and walk alone into the basilica. You sit beneath the dome, staring up into the heavens rendered in gold and blue. You think of what it means to call someone a saint, to declare their soul beyond corruption, their life a beacon, to bind their memory to eternity. Once you believed that sainthood was a rare miracle, a thing confirmed through divine signs. Now, you see it too often wrapped in parchment, smothered in influence, wielded like a scepter. It's not that the monk was unworthy, but the pressure to declare him worthy so quickly, so cleanly, it makes you hesitate. That evening, you review the reports of his miracles: a healed child, a vision during plague, a fire that spared a chapel. But every story is told secondhand, passed through mouths eager to believe. You remember the caution written in canon law: let no man be made a saint swiftly, lest error become dogma. You pace the room and wonder, what if you delay? Will the people wait? Or will they see your silence as heresy, your caution as pride? Eventually, you make your decision. You do not canonize, not yet. You send a letter, rich in praise, but firm in delay. You ask for more investigation, for more time. You pray they understand. But you also prepare for the backlash, because in denying a saint, you risk creating a martyr, and in choosing integrity, you may offend the very kingdom whose armies protect your borders. That night, you write in your private journal, a habit you keep in cipher. Sainthood should sanctify truth, not convenience. You close the book and blow out the candle. Outside, a storm begins to brew. Inside, you feel one waiting too. The people want holiness, but what they want even more is certainty, and you cannot give them either without a cost. The scrolls lie open before you, heavy with ink and accusation. A minor heresy has flared up in a coastal diocese. Nothing explosive, not yet, but troubling enough to demand your attention. A scholar priest has been teaching that salvation lies in personal revelation rather than church authority. His words are measured, his tone respectful, but his meaning is unmistakable. And his following is growing, not only among peasants, but among younger clergy. The bishop has written in panic. He demands excommunication. He demands punishment. He demands fire. And now the burden of judgment rests with you. You reread the priest's words. There is danger in them, yes, but there is also yearning. A desire for truth unchained from hierarchy. A voice reaching out to God through study, solitude, and devotion. You understand that hunger. Once, in your youth, you too wondered whether the divine could be met without the architecture of Rome. But that was before the mitre, before the throne. Now you are the architecture. You are the gate. And the gate must stand firm, even if it blocks the sunlight. You summon your theological advisors. They argue in tones thick with fear and pride. Some call for swift condemnation, fearing a repeat of past rebellions. Others urge patience, citing nuance and context. But no one dares speak plainly about the real reason for urgency, the precedent. If this priest is left unchecked, others will rise. If his vision spreads, it threatens the very structure that holds your world together. Doctrine is not just belief, it is power, stability, inheritance. It is the glue that binds an empire of souls. You retire to your study with parchment and candlelight, your mind heavy. You remember the stories of earlier popes who crushed dissent with an iron hand. You also remember the blood that followed, the fires, the rebellions, the schisms. You recall one passage from Scripture that never leaves you. The letter kills, but the spirit gives life. You wonder what it means in this moment. Does the defense of doctrine demand the death of its challengers? Or can truth withstand examination without crumbling? Eventually, you issue your judgment. The priest is to be silenced, not burned. He is removed from his position, placed under spiritual supervision, forbidden from preaching, but not declared a heretic. You hope this will be enough to reassure the bishops, to slow the momentum of his ideas, to prevent a wider rupture. But you also know it may only delay the storm. Ideas, once loosed into the world, are hard to call back. That night, you kneel at your private altar and pray, not for victory, but for discernment. You whisper into the shadows, asking whether you've acted out of fear or wisdom, whether you've defended truth or preserved convenience. The silence answers you, as it always does. Doctrine, you've learned, is a sword that cuts both ways, and every pope must wield it with a trembling hand, knowing that one stroke too far can sever the very body it was meant to protect. At dawn, you awaken to the tolling of bells that echo across the 7 hills of Rome. But these are not bells of celebration or liturgy, they ring in mourning. A bishop in the east has been assassinated, stabbed while giving last rites in a town torn by revolt. The local authorities blame heretics. The heretics blame soldiers loyal to a baron with a long memory. Somewhere in the middle, a priest stands weeping over the bishop's torn vestments. The messenger who brings the news has ridden for 3 days without sleep. He delivers the letter in person, hands shaking, eyes haunted. You sit in silence after he leaves. The bishop was a friend, a man of reason and humor, one of the few who dared speak to you without flattery. You remember walking with him along the Tiber, debating the role of mercy and punishment. Now he is gone. Another servant of the church, struck down not by plague or age, but by violence born of politics, faith, vengeance, threads that all twist together in your crown. You summon your consistory and announce a day of mourning. But in the eyes of the cardinals, you see calculation already at work. Who will inherit his seat? Which province will gain favor? Will the bishopric be split, strengthened, bargained over? They do not say these things aloud. They are men of God, after all. But you've learned to read the room like scripture. No loss remains purely spiritual, not in this city. In the privacy of your study, you stare at the ancient silver ring on your finger, the ring of the fisherman, passed down from saint to saint, symbol of your dominion. Once, Moa, it moved you. Now it feels heavier by the day. It's not the metal that weighs. It's the chain it represents. The invisible chain of obligation, of expectation, of centuries of precedent and politics knotted tightly around your soul. You are Peter's heir, but you do not fish for men. You fight to keep the boat from sinking. Later, you draft a public decree honoring the bishop. You call him a martyr, a faithful shepherd. You urge peace in the province, cooperation between rulers and the church. You write the words knowing they will be copied, sung, debated, but you also write a private letter to the bishop's apprentice, a quiet young man with eyes like burning coal. You tell him the truth, that his mentor died serving a church that often demands more than it gives, that holiness does not shield one from suffering, that to wear the cross is to carry it. You ask him to stay, not to avenge, but to rebuild. You tell him he is needed, and as you press your seal into the wax, you feel the chain tighten once more. You are the Pope, the fisherman, and every soul you save becomes a weight you must bear, not in pride, but in sorrow, and the sea beneath your bark grows no calmer with time. By midday, the square outside St. Peter's is flooded with pilgrims. They've come from every corner of Christendom, hobbling in on canes, clutching children, singing psalms in dialects you barely recognize. Some walk barefoot, their souls blistered raw from weeks on the road. Others arrive on the backs of mules, led by tired merchants or clerics who see pilgrimage as penance, trade, or both. The crowd moves like a slow tide across the flagstones, pressing toward the basilica with awe, desperation, and hunger in their eyes. From your chamber window, you watch them, small as ants, luminous with longing. This morning, you're expected to deliver a public blessing. It's a routine event by papal standards, but nothing about it feels routine. There is always something unnerving about facing that many eyes. Eyes that see you not as a man, but as something more. To them, you are not the weary scholar who frets over debts and doctrine. You are the vicar of Christ, anointed, holy, untouchable. They do not see the man who coughed blood into a handkerchief last night or who lost his temper over a corrupted ledger. They see robes, light, a crown, a myth. The trumpets sound as you step onto the balcony. A hush falls over the crowd, a reverent silence broken only by the rustle of banners and the cooing of doves. You raise your hand in blessing, and thousands bow their heads. It should feel powerful. Instead, it feels like a mask you can't remove. You speak the rite, voice steady, words ancient and precise. You declare peace, health, salvation. You offer indulgences to those who traveled far, and prayers for the sick, the grieving, the hopeful. You watch their faces lift in gratitude, tears welling in their eyes, and you feel like a liar, because you know some of them will die on the road back. Bandits, sickness, starvation, they hover just outside the blessing's reach. You know that miracles are rare, and that the holy relics beneath the basilica are mostly bone and legend. You know that some of these people gave their last coin to be here, and they'll return to empty villages that reek of famine and debt. But still, you bless them, because what else can you do? Afterward, you descend the steps and disappear behind the carved doors. In the silence of your study, you sit alone, removing the weighty stole from your shoulders. You look in the mirror and search for the man beneath the symbols. You wonder when he vanished, or if he ever truly existed. You pick up a small carved cross, one given to you by a child during a previous audience. It's crude, splintered, worn smooth by touch. You hold it tightly, not in piety, but as anchor. Later, you will hear pilgrims say that the Pope looked like a beacon today, that his words healed, that his eyes glowed with divine light. You won't correct them, but you will remember the truth, that sometimes the greatest burden isn't to be hated or feared, it's to be adored by those who cannot see your cracks. The door creaks as you step into the apostolic archives, a space few ever enter without purpose. It smells of dust and ink, of secrets too old to breathe free air. Row upon row of vellum-bound tomes line the walls, some so ancient their bindings crumble when touched. Here lie the records of every papal decree, every council, every whisper committed to script in centuries past. The shelves don't merely hold history, they hold judgment. And today you've come seeking counsel not from the living, but from the dead. A letter arrived yesterday from a distant kingdom, one of those borderland thrones that lives half in Christendom and half in chaos. The king wants legitimacy. He claims his line is pure, that his rival's bloodline is forged. He asks the Pope to decide, to look backward through blood and parchment and make a judgment that will echo through the generations. And so here you are, thumbing through papal bulls, royal records, and treaties inked by hands long since turned to dust. You read the names, Pope Leo, Pope Boniface, Pope Celestine, and see the weight of their decisions. Some ruled with fire, others with silence. Some tore kingdoms in two with a sentence. Some healed them with a single indulgence. You find yourself wondering whether they struggled as you do, seated at this same desk, their fingers shaking over ink. Whether they paused, even for a moment, before they decided who lived as king and who died a traitor. A parchment catches your eye, half buried, half forgotten. It bears the seal of a pope who excommunicated an entire city for disobedience. You read his reasoning. It is elegant, cold, unyielding. And yet in the margins, a scribe has written a note, barely visible. It reads, "He wept after the seal was pressed. The hair on your arms rises because you understand." You close the book and lean back, listening to the room's quiet. Not silence exactly. The building creaks. The air breathes. You imagine the ghosts of your predecessors watching from the shelves, men crowned in glory and buried under the weight of their choices. They are not saints here, not myths, just men like you, once terrified, once defiant, once alone. You make your decision before leaving. You will not name the rightful heir, not yet. You will send a delegation to investigate. You will slow the judgment, stretch it across time, force the would-be kings to wait. Because what you now understand is this: some decisions do not need to be swift to be righteous. Some fires go out if you deny them air. When the door closes behind you, the archives return to their dreaming. The popes remain on their shelves, their secrets folded in leather and script. But as you walk away, you carry their whispers with you. You know now that every pope leaves something behind in this room. Truths too heavy to speak, regrets too sacred to burn. And you will leave yours too, in time. The goblet is polished silver, delicate and unassuming, sitting beside your bread and salted fish. You almost don't notice it. The servant who placed it bowed deeply, then vanished like a shadow behind the curtain. It could be any other meal, any other quiet evening spent alone in the papal apartments. But tonight, something in you hesitates. A whisper in the back of your mind. You set the cup down without drinking, not out of fear exactly, but out of memory. You've heard too many stories. Earlier that day, a courier arrived from the south, bearing news of unrest in a province whose loyalty to the papacy is conditional. One of your edicts had tightened control over a local abbey's lands, cutting into noble revenue. You knew it would sting. But you didn't expect this much resistance. Rumors have followed that a noble's son was imprisoned, that a bishop's niece was humiliated, that someone has sworn revenge. Words are cheap, but poison is not. Poison is intentional. You summon your steward, calmly, and request the cup removed. No accusations, no alarms, just quiet action. He nods and takes it away without a word. You watch him go, the weight of suspicion pressing into your chest. Is this how it begins, or how it ends? A pope slipping into silence not by old age or divine will, but by someone else's grievance, distilled into liquid form. Later that evening, you walk through the halls with a candle in hand. The marble seems colder, the silence more brittle. You find yourself remembering the tale of Pope Clement, who died after a mysterious illness overtook him in mere days, or the whispers around Pope John, whose enemies toasted his demise even before his body was cold. You wonder how many of your predecessors died, not from natural causes, but from cups left too long unwatched. You reach the chapel and kneel, but prayer does not come easily. You are not afraid of death. You've made peace with that long ago. What haunts you is the thought of leaving your work unfinished, of reforms half written, of alliances half forged, of the church left vulnerable to wolves within and without. You pray not for protection, but for time, just a little more time. The next morning, you eat nothing. You watch every movement of the kitchen staff, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Paranoia is no sin in Rome, not when you're surrounded by ambition and grudges dressed in robes. You instruct your physician to taste all drinks in your presence moving forward. He agrees with quiet resignation. He, too, has heard the stories. And so another day passes. You breathe, you write, you bless, and you wait. Not for death, but for calm. For the moment when the church no longer needs to fear itself. But you know, deep down, that day may never come. For in Rome, it is not the sword that kills the Pope. It is the silence in the room after the cup has touched the lips. The parchment rests before you on the oak desk, thick and stiff with wax and age. Its purpose is monumental, yet its form is deceptively simple, just a papal bull, another decree to carry your seal and command. But this one is different. It concerns a kingdom unraveling in the north, torn between a rebellious archbishop and a monarch too eager to tax the sacraments. The bishops write to you with trembling ink, begging for clarity. The king sends gold and threats in equal measure. Both demand your word, your judgment, your intervention. And so the burden of authorship falls to you. You run your fingers over the draft, still damp from the scribe's careful quill. The language is balanced, measured, precise. It censures the overreach of secular rule while reaffirming the sanctity of ecclesiastical independence. But hidden between the lines is a blade, because whichever side finds favor in your wording will claim divine authority, and whichever side is rebuked will brand you tyrant. This is not a letter, it is a weapon. Your advisors have already given their counsel. The chancellor urges strength. He believes compromise will only embolden the king. The cardinal of letters pleads for diplomacy, warning of excommunication's risks. And your confessor, quiet but firm, reminds you that the church exists not to dominate, but to guide. You listen, you nod. But in the end, no council can write the bull for you. Only you can wield the pen. As you sit with the parchment, you recall other bulls from history, some that rallied the faithful, some that lit cities aflame. One sanctioned a crusade that claimed thousands of lives. Another split the church itself. Words endure longer than armies. And this one, you sense, may alter more than borders. It may shape the memory of your entire pontificate. You lift the pen. Ink flows. With each stroke, you commit not only policy, but identity. You write of divine order, of episcopal duty, of the crown's limits before the altar. You stop short of excommunication, but you make the boundaries clear. No king, you declare, no matter how righteous, may levy spiritual tolls without the blessing of Rome. You sign it with your papal name, press your ring into the seal, and sit in silence as the wax cools. When the courier departs, bearing the bull toward the icy north, you feel no triumph. Only gravity, only the knowledge that somewhere, perhaps as soon as the letter is read aloud, soldiers will be summoned and churches will be closed. Perhaps even blood will be shed. And it will all trace back to this moment, this parchment, this ink. Later, alone in your chapel, you whisper a prayer not for the bull to succeed, but for those who will suffer under its consequences. You ask forgiveness for the pain caused by principle. For in this office, justice is rarely clean. It drips with compromise. And every time you sign your name, you learn again that the weight of the tiara is not gold. It is the blood on your hands that no blessing can ever fully wash away. You sit beneath the frescoed ceiling of the papal audience hall, watching as the dignitaries file in, each robed in silk, each bowing just low enough to meet protocol, but not an inch more. They've come from the fractured corners of Christendom, emissaries from kingdoms that share communion but not peace, bishops who speak the same creed but serve rival kings, and abbots whose monasteries hoard wealth under vows of poverty. They smile, they flatter, they quote scripture, but you feel the tension in their jaws, the tightness behind their words. They are here not to listen, but to posture. They do not seek the Pope. They seek a referee for their quarrels. The meeting is to discuss church unity, an increasingly fragile idea. One faction demands stricter enforcement of doctrine. Another calls for liturgical reform to meet the needs of new converts abroad. A third insists that ancient languages and rites must remain untouched. You nod as they speak, all the while feeling your stomach knot. Because beneath their arguments lies something no bull or synod can erase: ambition. Each man here believes the church should look like his mirror. You rise and address them with the voice they expect, measured, paternal, calm. You invoke the early church, the councils of old, the unbroken line from Peter to your own unsteady feet. You speak of harmony, of balance, of the need for humility in disagreement. The words echo well in this hall of saints in gold. But as you speak, you catch the eyes of the more seasoned delegates. They are not moved. They are calculating what they might gain or lose depending on what you will or will not allow. Later, in private, one bishop corners you. He suggests a new tithe arrangement in exchange for voting with your favored reforms. Another offers to pressure his monarch to back your interests in a border dispute if you appoint his cousin as an auxiliary bishop. These offers are wrapped in politeness, almost indistinguishable from loyalty. But you see through them. These men are not building unity. They are bidding on its collapse. You retreat that evening to the gardens of the Lateran Palace, the air thick with jasmine and old soil. You walk slowly, listening to the chirp of insects, the distant clang of bells. You think of unity, not the pristine concept enshrined in theology, but the living, gasping thing that is the church itself. It breathes only because you hold its fractures close, like a potter cradling a cracked vessel. You understand now why so many popes turn stern in old age. It is not because they lose their mercy. It is because they learn that mercy alone cannot hold a church together. Sometimes it takes masks, masks of certainty, of strength, of divinely sanctioned authority. You wear that mask each day, and when you take it off at night, your reflection looks back at you, hollow-eyed but resolute. You are the center of a unity that must be performed, even when it cannot be lived. The bells begin at sunrise, soft at first, then growing louder as the hours pass. From every corner of Rome, their clangor rolls across rooftops and courtyards, echoing through the basilicas and market squares. It is the feast of Saints Peter and Paul, a day when the faithful gather beneath the banners of history to honor the martyrs and the rock on which the church was built. It is also your day, the Pope's Day. Processions are planned, relics are displayed, and the papal throne will be carried before the people like a living icon. The city expects radiance. What they do not see is the silence beneath it. You rise before the sun and dress slowly. The vestments are thick with gold thread, stiff with age and reverence. Your attendants move quietly around you, fastening clasps, adjusting folds, preparing the regalia that tells the world you are more than a man. You stand before the mirror and look at the image it reflects, a figure cloaked in authority, crowned in tradition. But beneath it all, you still feel like a servant cloaked in borrowed glory. As you step into the papal litter, you hear the cheers begin. Thousands line the roads to St. Peter's, waving branches and banners, crying out blessings in a dozen tongues. Some reach out to touch the hem of your garment. Others hold up infants for your gaze. You nod. You raise your hand in benediction. You smile. But it is a distant smile, hollowed by ritual. Every gesture has been rehearsed for centuries. You are not yourself here. You are a role. When you enter the basilica, the choir breaks into song, and the floor vibrates with the weight of history. You kneel before the tomb of St. Peter, your forehead touching the cold stone. You ask for guidance, as always, for strength, for clarity. And in the long pause before rising, you hear only silence. A deep, still silence. Not emptiness, but a reminder that no matter how grand the robes or ancient the titles, your voice fades into eternity like smoke in a cathedral. The Mass proceeds in perfect choreography. Incense swirls, candles burn. Words are spoken that echo the same syllables uttered by generations long dead. You speak them with reverence, but your mind wanders. You think of the young monk you once were, reading scripture by candlelight, dreaming of healing the world. You think of the conclave, the first tremor in your hand as you placed your name on the ballot. You think of the ledger still waiting on your desk, the debts, the wars, the decisions still unfinished. When the final hymn fades and the bells resume their toll, you step into the courtyard. The crowd cheers again. They do not know what you know, that the tiara is not a crown of glory, but of weight, that the most powerful man in Christendom is still shackled by expectation and time. You lift your hand one last time, not as a ruler, but as a man in need of mercy. And as the cheers wash over you, you remember the quiet, and hope, perhaps, that God heard it.